Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
This happened like 12 years ago. I was 14 and my sister was 12. It was during summer vacation and we were hanging out, just the two of us outside, midday. We lived in a smallish town where during weekdays it was pretty empty because adults were at work. Anyway, we'd been messing around, picking flowers and other random stuff, when we decided to cut through a massive field of undeveloped land on the edge of our suburb. It was technically a shortcut to get home, but it wasn't the best idea because it was really bumpy, potted land that other kids and teens left all sorts of stuff laying in. Well, our bad decision came around and bit us. We hadn't made it very far in the field when my sister got two bad things at once. Some sort of twisted metal, maybe an old piece of tool, pierced right through her foam flip-flop and into her foot, and right after it happened she shrieked, jerked, and twisted that ankle on the uneven ground. She started crying and howling and I was worried. The metal hadn't gone too deep and I was able to stop the bleeding with the hem of my shirt, but she couldn't walk anymore obviously. Our parents weren't available, didn't know where we were, and this was before I had a cell phone. My sister was still on the ground crying and I was trying to calm her down when something made me feel like looking up. Y'all, it was the feeling of being watched. Out of the field, across the road, standing on the corner in the distance was some random guy watching us. He was too far away for me to see him clearly. All I could tell for sure was that he was blonde, probably adult, and dressed too warmly for July. He was all alone, stock still, just staring at us. I looked back at my sister and basically said to get on my back. I was carrying her home. We were leaving right now. Now, I had to carefully pick my way through this stupid field in my own bad flip-flops, with my crying sister on my back. Luckily, she was tiny, but I was no linebacker either. It had rained a day ago, and the field had puddles of water in the low spots. We were both kind of wet from her falling when she got hurt. I swiveled back to check if he was still watching us, and he was. Not only was he watching us, but he'd crossed the road and entered the field. Now he was standing stock still again and just watching. Ice in the veins doesn't describe it. One of the scariest moments of my life up to that point. My sister looked when I looked, saw my face, and started crying even harder. I just shook her a bit on my back and whispered something like, "Stop it. I need to concentrate on getting us home. Watch him and tell me if he starts following again. Just be quiet." So that's what we did. I started walking again as fast as I could without getting hurt. My sister watched him while I carried her. After less than a minute, she whispered to me that he was following again. How fast? Just walking. Is he watching us? Yes. I told her to tell me if anything changed and kept going. I stomped through puddles and I couldn't see into when I had to, hoping there was nothing sharp in them. I lost a flip-flop in the mud and just kept going. We were about 3/4 of the way through the massive field when my sister whispered that I least wanted to hear. He was speeding up. I turned us right around, so we were facing him head on, and as loud as I could, I yelled something like, "Hey, we see you, leave us alone, I'll call the cops." Nothing. He'd stop again when I stopped, but gave no sign whatsoever he'd heard me. Just nothing. I turned us around again and kept going. My poor little sister was shaking like a leaf and just saying my name over and over again. It was awful, and there was nothing I could do but keep going. Eventually, he started following again, at a slow pace. I finally made it into our suburb, out of the muddy field and onto solid concrete. Told my sister to hold on as tight as she could and booked it. Started running with her on my back as fast as I could. We couldn't see him anymore, didn't know what he was doing or where he was. Every muscle hurt from carrying her so far. My bare foot was all scratched up from the road, but I didn't stop. I kept moving. With my sister looking out behind us, it felt like my heart was going to explode. After what felt like forever, I made it to our house, ran across the yard, up the drive, put down my sister, who started crying again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use my key. We made it in safely and called my mom. She had us lock every door and window and came rushing home, but nothing happened after that. He never found us, we never saw him again. So a few years ago, I, a 17-year-old female at the time, would attend community college at the outskirts of my hometown. I would take an 1.5 hour long bus drive because both of my parents worked and my other siblings were too young to drive. The outskirts of my town, despite being the literal outskirts, are more populated than you expect, with strip malls and apartment buildings. The bus would drop me off about 4 blocks from my university, which isn't too far. I always enjoyed those few minutes. Anyway, this one time, I left my phone at the library. story. Using my brother's phone, I called a friend who worked at the school library during the late evening shift, 7 to 9, and he'd said he'd bring my phone to me, but he lived closer to the college than I did, so I told him I'd just meet him at his shift and pick it up myself. He said okay, and I boarded the bus at around 6. Now, I get off the bus at my usual spot and the place looked deserted. I'd never been there that late at night, and maybe it was because it was a weekday that people were home, or I don't know. I had my brother's phone in my pocket and just clutched it tighter and tighter, picking up my speed until I was practically jogging. I'm nearing to a corner when a flash of light goes off to my right. There, in the shadows, is a sleazy looking man. He's balding with a tourist shirt unbuttoned halfway. He was wearing sunglasses at night and was wearing some gold jewelry, and most importantly, he had just taken a picture of me. In the instant that I saw the flash go off, I knew it was coming from his phone. Now, I think it's important to understand our positioning. He was pressed against a building to my right at the corner I had turned. I was about 10 feet away from him. To my left, on the same side of the street, was a car with blacked out windows and no license plates, directly across the sidewalk from the man. The car was parked with the driver's seat facing me, so that it was on the wrong side of the road, because America drives on the right side as opposed to the left. I had slowed down at that point as I began to debate my next move: cross the street and continue walking, make a break for the school, turn 180 and leave my phone at the library, or approach the potentially dangerous man. I did the stupidest thing possible and approached the man. Anyway, I demanded to know what he was doing. He looked taken aback. I could see his brain short-circuiting because I was demanding to know what he was doing. He eventually sputtered about how he was just standing here. I said, "No, I saw you take that picture of me." His face fell. He started saying no, he hadn't done that. Why would he want a picture of me? I had imagined it. I asked to see his gallery, which is extremely risky because who knows what I could have seen. He slowly pulls up his gallery and as it's opening, I see a blurry picture of me in the distance. I didn't think I'd get that far. Granted, I had been running on adrenaline during our whole interaction, but this really made me pause. I told him to delete it. Then a door slammed shut. I just knew it was the parked car. My brain cleared up and I hightailed it to the school. I could hear a single pair of footsteps behind me, but I sure wasn't going to turn around and check who it was. The car started, but they would have to do a U-turn on a relatively narrow street just to be able to follow me. I think that's what saved my life. The fact that the car was parked facing the wrong direction. I reached the school out of breath and in tears. My friend opened the building for me and I explained what had happened. He locked us in while he called the police and we waited for them, but the sleazy guy and his buddy were never found. Anyway, my mom had gotten out of work by that point and I called her to ask to pick me up. We waited with my friend till the end of his shift and drove him home too. Needless to say, I carry a mace with me everywhere I go now and I'm yet to find a police report stating a guy matching his description had been arrested. To be honest, I don't think the police believed me fully, but who knows. I'm a single male, 33 years old, who lives alone in Denver. My apartment complex is not what you would call a nice building. I'm on a road close to Colfax Avenue, which if you're familiar with the geography of this area is not the safest boulevard in town. I'm a few streets away from it, but close enough that I wouldn't consider this an up-and-coming neighborhood. This evening, I was watching Netflix on my couch. My two cats were cuddled up against me as I lay under a comforter. The night before, I had watched a horror movie that was scary enough to leave me in an unsettled mood, making it hard to sleep. So this night I decided to watch a stand-up special instead. Keep it light so I wouldn't have any trouble getting some shut-eye. I have classes early the next morning, so I was surprised when I made the conscious decision to turn on a second stand-up special and let myself fall asleep on the couch. I was just so comfy where I lay and didn't want to move, not even to turn off the several lights on throughout my apartment. I remember dozing off around 11 o'clock. It was effortless, which meant I was really snug under the covers with my cats flanking me on either end, creating a tucked-in feeling. And all of a sudden, I'm not sleeping anymore. I am woken up by a knock at my door. Then a man's voice says maintenance. I just sat there, sitting bolt upright on my couch. I knew something was off. I looked at my phone, which was by my left hand, and the time was 2:15 a.m. I didn't move. The floors of my apartment are old wood, and there are many creaky floorboards. I didn't want whoever was knocking to know someone was at home and awake, let alone alert to his presence. My cats got up and ran over to the door as they normally would, but I stayed still and listened. After a few minutes with no answer, the man walked away from the door and down the hallway to the stairs. A moment after that, I heard the back door to the building swing open and closed. I have one window where I have a partial view of that door, so I break my paralysis and race over to it. I saw an old-looking green SUV sitting in the no parking zone just in front of the back door. It must have been running the entire time because I didn't hear it start up and the brake lights were glowing red. Someone, presumably the maintenance man, got in the car and it drove off. I don't know how this individual got into the building in the first place, as you would need a key to do so. I don't know what his intentions were, but no one knocks on someone's door at 2:15 a.m. claiming to work for the landlord with good deeds in mind. So I'm a 23-year-old female. I live in a townhouse with my 2 children, 2 and 6 months old. My fiance did live with us until 2 weeks ago when I caught him trying to have relationships with other women and made him move out. That's important to the story. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and when he did live with us, my ex worked evenings. Let me set the scene. We live in a tiny house in northern Pennsylvania. My line of townhouses sits in front of a big field that runs to a line of woods. As far as I'm aware, these woods stretch out for at least a few miles, and I'm not aware of any houses in there or any roads that lead through them. My living room has 3 windows that look to the field, and my bedroom on the 2nd floor only has 1 window that faces that way as well. People do tend to walk their dogs back in the field, and kids sometimes play back there, but I rarely ever see anyone close to my house. For that reason, I tend to leave my blinds and curtains open because I guess I just enjoy the view. So in July of 2019, I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep. All the lights were off, but I had my window and blinds open since it was so warm. I was looking out the window and I noticed small red and white lights just outside. I got up and looked to realize that the lights were coming from a drone. I ran downstairs to where my fiance at the time was sitting in the living room and ran to the window. I told him what I saw, but of course when he went to look, it was gone. I was paranoid that the drone could have had a camera on it and someone was watching me with it. I kept my blinds closed for a while after that. Fast forward to January of this year. I guess I stupidly got comfortable and assumed that whoever it was flying the drone was a one-time creep. My blinds were open and I had just gotten out of the shower. I was sitting on my bed pretty much naked except for my underwear, scrolling on my phone when out of the corner of my eye I saw lights again out of the dark window. It was that drone again. I ran out of the room and waited for a few minutes. I peeked back into my room and it was gone. I quickly shut my blinds and got dressed. Honestly, I felt sick at how stupid I was to leave my window open again, especially when I was practically naked. Now for the real disturbing part. My 2-year-old son and I were out in the field 2 weeks ago, 3 days after I kicked out my boyfriend playing ball. I had my 6-month-old strapped to me in a baby carrier. Probably about a half hour after we had been out there, I heard a slight whirring noise coming towards us. I looked up and saw the drone flying towards us. I looked around and didn't see anyone. It stopped right over us. I freaked and grabbed my son and dragged him into the house, looking back at the tree line every so often as we went. I knew they had to be hiding in there. I went inside, closed the blinds, and called my mom and told her about the situation. She told me just to keep an eye out. I said I would. My son likes to line his toys up against the window, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to open them up just an inch or so. A little while later, after we ate dinner and it was almost dark, I was feeding my 6-month-old and my son was playing. He was standing over by the window, lining up his toys. He started saying dada, dada. I assumed he was just missing his father and dismissed him by saying he was going to see him that weekend. He kept saying dada, dada, though. I looked up and saw him pointing to the window under the little gap the blinds didn't cover. I froze. I remembered that he calls any man with facial hair dada because it reminds him of his father, but there was no way someone would be bold enough to actually come up to my window. Not when my neighbors are literally right there. Anyone could see them, but there aren't any lights back there, so unless someone actually stepped out of their house, I guess nobody would see them. Maybe it was my ex, but he should be at work at that time. I ran to the window and moved my son. I didn't want to lift the blinds, but honestly, I was sure it had to be the person who had been creeping on me for the past year, and I wanted to see who it was. I pushed the blinds up and was looking at a man who I definitely had never seen before, crouching in front of me. He was bald with a mustache and goatee. I have no idea how old he was. He could have been anywhere from 30 to 50. When he saw me, he smiled and stood up. I yelled and told him to screw off and that I was going to call the cops. He just stood there, smiling at me like some freak. I was about to close the blinds again when he said something I couldn't hear. I told him to leave again and he said, louder this time, I just want to talk to you. I shook my head no and yelled the same thing to him. He started slapping his hands on the window, yelling no, no, no over and over. I grabbed my phone, scared he was going to try to break in. I dialed 911. My kids were crying from the yelling and I felt on the verge of tears. I told the operator what was going on. The whole time I was on the phone, the man was pounding on my window, screaming now. He was yelling all kinds of nonsense, and I only caught some of it. He said he's been watching me for months, I'm beautiful, he wants to come with them, he'll kill my children if I don't. The operator told me to go into an upstairs room and hide until the police arrive. My town doesn't have a police department, so we rely on the state police. She said it would be about 20 minutes, but to stay on the phone with her. The man was practically punching my window now and was just screaming like a maniac. I was about to grab my kids and run upstairs when I heard someone else screaming. The man bolted. I looked out and saw my neighbor and his girlfriend. I opened the window and my neighbor said that he heard the man, so he ran around the building. He said when the guy heard him, he ran back to the woods and disappeared in the tree line. They said they also called the police. I thanked them 100 times. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did a quick search around the buildings and found the man and arrested him. I don't know why that guy targeted me or why he waited so long to do something. I'm just happy my neighbors were there to intervene, or who knows what would have happened. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us three at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are window doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. Gun owner family in a quiet rural West Virginia neighborhood, etc. I asked her what she was talking about and she looked equally surprised as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. Tall white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. At the time, I just turned 17 and was still pretty naive. I live in England, so it is legal to work in a bar and serve alcohol supervised, but not to drink alcohol. Not that it stopped me. I worked in a working men's club filled with middle-aged elderly people. Most were really nice. I sold bingo tickets twice for a week for my dad's cousin and I was pretty good at it. It's not typical to get tips here, but I earned more in tips than I did my actual wage. On a Saturday, my dad would come with me to have a drink with my elder sister while they played competitive darts in the main bar overlooking my booth. This one particular night, there was a middle-aged, average-looking guy, a little on the plump side but generally unnoticeable. On the first round of selling tickets, he was at the fruit machine opposite the entire time, looking over at me occasionally. The second round he approached me, asked me what I was selling, how bingo worked, etc. Clearly had never played before, but hey, everyone starts somewhere, right? He bought some tickets and offered to buy me a drink. I declined and informed him I was underage. By now I had a bit of an uneasy vibe and didn't want to take a drink from a guy I don't know. He then offered a cola, complimenting me a little too hard. Again declined and went on my way to help with the game in the main hall, part of my job. Third time, he stood against the wall adjacent to me and just watched me work. He'd waited until the queue calmed down and bragged about how much money he had and now he wants to be my sugar dad. How cute I am, commenting on my figure. I was trapped in my booth. I was late into the main hall, so the concert chairman, guy who calls out the bingo numbers and gives out winnings, comes out and asks what was going going on. This guy claims we were just talking. I apologized to the chairman and he walked me to the hall, said he could see I was freaked out, so I told him everything. He made the bar staff aware, who also made my boss, my dad's cousin, aware also. Last round of selling tickets, he doesn't even wait for me to get back in my booth. He grabs my butt, telling me how he wants to be my sugar dad once again, tries to push me against the wall and is suddenly spun around, not just by my dad but my boss and numerous staff members and customers who heard and saw what went down. He started arguing his innocence until my dad not so politely introduced himself. He knew he was screwed. My dad punched him in the nose, blood running down his face. Everyone picked him up like a plank of wood and threw him out the closed door. Never saw him after that. Everyone checked up on me to make sure I was okay. My sister covered the rest of the shift and I had a free bar tab for 2 months. It was a chilly autumn evening when I returned home from work. The setting sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows on the quiet suburban streets. As I pulled into my driveway, a sense of relief washed over me. I was eager to unwind, cozy up with a book, and forget about the stresses of the day. I lived alone in a small, single-story house on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood was peaceful, and I had always felt safe there. But little did I know that my peaceful life was about to take a chilling turn. It all started with a simple knock on my front door. I didn't think much of it. It wasn't uncommon for a neighbor or delivery person to stop by. However, when I opened the door, my eyes met those of a complete stranger. He was a tall, weary man with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were worn and dirty, and his gaze was unsettlingly intense. "Hi there," he said, his voice a little too eager. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm new to the area, and my car broke down a few streets over. Could I use your phone to call for a tow?" His story sounded plausible, but something about his demeanor made me feel uneasy. I hesitated for a moment before offering to make the call for him instead. He seemed grateful and handed me a scrap of paper with a number scrawled on it. As I dialed, he hovered uncomfortably close, making me anxious. A voice on the other end of the line confirmed that a tow truck was on its way. I informed the man and he thanked me profusely, promising to repay me the favor someday. I didn't think much of it and politely bid him farewell. Over the next few weeks, the stranger's visits became frequent. He would drop by unannounced, often with a different excuse each time. Sometimes he claimed he needed directions, and other times he said he was looking for a lost pet. Each time, I became more suspicious of his intentions, but I didn't want to escalate the situation. Then one night, as I was preparing dinner in my kitchen, I noticed movement outside of my window. Peering through the curtains, I saw the man standing in my backyard, watching me intently. My heart pounded and I quickly turned off the lights, hoping he would think I wasn't home. I considered calling the police, but worried that it might make him more aggressive. The visits continued and I grew increasingly uneasy. I started locking all of my doors and windows, even during the day. I confided in a few close friends about the situation, and they urged me to contact the authorities, but I was hesitant, fearing it might provoke the man further. One afternoon, as I was leaving for work, I spotted him waiting near my car. My heart sank and I immediately retreated back into my house, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. After a few minutes, I carefully peeked outside, relieved to find him gone. Enough was enough. I contacted the local police and explained the situation. They assured me they would keep an eye on the area and advised me to report any further incidents. I felt a bit safer knowing that they were aware of the situation. Months passed and life gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. The persistent visitor had vanished from my life, leaving me with a mix of relief and lingering apprehension. I began to let my guard down, hoping that he had truly moved on and that my days of fear were behind me. But as winter approached, so did an unsettling change in the atmosphere. One evening, while I was engrossed in a movie, I heard a faint tapping sound at my window. My heart raced as I cautiously approached the source of the noise. As I drew the curtains aside, I found myself face to face with a chilling sight. A message etched into the frost of the glass that read, "Missed you." Fear gripped me like a vice, and I immediately called the police, showing them the eerie message. They took it seriously and conducted a thorough investigation, but without any leads or concrete evidence, there was little they could do. The visits intensified once again. The man seemed to know my schedule, always choosing moments when I was alone to make his presence known. He would leave unsettling notes on my doorstep, scrawled on random pieces of paper or even on torn out pages from my own books. Each message was cryptic, like twisted riddles meant to unsettle my mind. With the police unable to catch him in the act, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed motion activated lights around my property and placed security cameras in every corner, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or any clue that could identify him. One bitterly cold night, I awoke to the sound of shuffling outside my bedroom window. My heart pounded in my chest as I summoned the courage to investigate. Peering through the curtains, I I saw the man trying to pry open a window. Panic surged through me and I called the police immediately. The dispatch operator kept me on the line as I hid in my closet, anxiously waiting for the police to arrive. The minutes felt like hours as I clutched my phone, praying for help to come in time. When the sirens finally echoed through the silent night, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The police caught the man red-handed, attempting to break into my home. He was arrested, and as they led him away, I saw the same intense gaze in his eyes, but it was mixed with a disturbing grin. The officers assured me that he wouldn't be causing me any more trouble, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ordeal wasn't truly over. The court proceedings were a stressful and harrowing experience. The man was charged with stalking, attempted burglary, and harassment, among other offenses. His defense lawyer tried to portray him as mentally unstable, but the evidence stacked against him was overwhelming. Finally, he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, with a restraining order in place to keep him away from me. The years passed and the fear that had once gripped me began to wane. I moved to a different town, started fresh, and gradually rebuilt my life. The memories of that terrifying period became like distant nightmares, fading with time. But as I share this story with you now, I can't help but glance over my shoulder occasionally, a lingering instinct born from the haunting experiences of the past. And so, I implore you to stay vigilant, for even in the most ordinary places, there may be shadows waiting to disturb your peace. It was a stormy evening, rain pounding relentlessly on my car's windshield as I drove down a deserted highway. The dim glow of streetlights illuminated the road ahead, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. I was eager to get home after a long day of traveling, but the weather seemed determined to keep me from reaching my destination. As I pressed on, my eyes caught a figure huddled by the roadside, drenched and holding out a thumb, a hitchhiker. My heart wavered between empathy and caution. It was late, and picking up a stranger in this weather was risky, but I couldn't ignore the guilt tugging at me. Against my better judgment, I decided to pull over. The moment he climbed into my car, I noticed something unsettling about the hitchhiker. His clothes were worn and his face bore the wariness of 1,000 miles. He looked much older than I had initially thought, with a scruffy beard and sunken eyes. His name was Jack, he said, and he was grateful for the ride. Jack didn't seem dangerous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He spoke with an air of sadness, hinting at a troubled past and recent hardships. I listened, offering a few words of comfort as we continued down the highway. As the rain intensified, visibility dwindled, and I focused intently on the road. I tried to keep the conversation going to stave off any awkwardness. However, Jack's responses grew increasingly vague, and he seemed preoccupied with something else entirely. "I really appreciate you giving me a lift," he finally said, breaking the silence. "I've been stranded for hours, and it's been tough to find someone willing to help." "It's no problem," I replied. "Where are you headed?" He hesitated for a moment before replying, "I don't really have a destination in mind, just trying to put some distance between me and the past, you know?" I nodded sympathetically, but a twinge of unease crawled up my spine. It was as though he was trying to avoid any specific details about his journey. My instincts urged me to stay vigilant, reminding me that trusting a stranger in the dark of night might not be the wisest decision. As we drove further, I noticed Jack glancing at my belongings in the backseat and even craning his neck to look at my GPS. It made me uneasy, as if he was sizing me up or planning something. I decided to divert his attention away from my personal items and steer the conversation toward more general topics. An exit sign came into view and I saw the perfect opportunity to end the ride. "Hey, this is my exit," I said, my voice feigning casualness. "I hope this spot works for you." But Jack's reaction was unexpected. His eyes widened and he looked genuinely alarmed. No, please, just a little farther," he pleaded. "I promise I won't be any trouble." My heart pounded as I weighed my options. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously amiss. However, I didn't want to put myself in any unnecessary danger. I decided to trust my gut and firmly insisted that I had to stop at that exit. Reluctantly, Jack agreed, and as I pulled over, he quickly thanked me and stepped out of the car. As I drove away, I glanced at my rearview mirror, and to my surprise, I saw him standing in the rain, watching my car until it disappeared from sight. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that lingered after encountering the mysterious hitchhiker named Jack. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, wondering what might have happened if I had ignored my instincts and continued driving with him. My unease grew when I realized that I hadn't taken proper precautions when offering him a ride. I scolded myself for not considering the potential risk of picking up a stranger, especially on a stormy night when visibility was poor. Determined to learn from the experience, I decided to be more cautious and prepared in the future. I researched safe practices for offering help to strangers, especially while driving alone. It became clear that while compassion is important, safety should never be compromised. Weeks passed and the memory of the encounter with Jack began to fade, buried under the weight of daily routines and responsibilities. But just when I thought I had put the incident behind me, a news report caught my attention. The local news featured featured a segment on a man named Jack Harrison, who had been involved in a series of violent crimes across neighboring states. My heart pounded as they showed his picture, confirming my worst fears. It was the same hitchhiker I had encountered that stormy night. According to the report, Jack had been arrested after leading the police on a high-speed chase, during which he injured several officers and caused a serious accident. The authorities had been searching for him for months, and he had a lengthy criminal history, including charges for assault, robbery, and even kidnapping. My hands trembled as I realized just how close I had come to danger. It sent shivers down my spine, knowing that I had unwittingly given a ride to a dangerous criminal. I couldn't help but think about the possible outcomes if I hadn't decided to trust my instincts and let him out of my car. The experience left a profound impact on me. I realized that we often encounter situations that demand a balance between compassion and caution. While I had wanted to help the hitchhiker, I had failed to prioritize my safety. From that moment on, I vowed to be more vigilant and aware of my potential risk when dealing with strangers, no matter how genuine they may seem. The news of Jack's arrest also led me to reevaluate my trust in others. Not everyone we meet has good intentions, and it's essential to stay vigilant and prioritize personal safety. I made a conscious effort to share my story with family and friends, hoping that my experience would serve as a cautionary tale and remind others to be wary in similar situations. As time passed, I carried the lesson with me, growing stronger in my resolve to prioritize safety while remaining compassionate. The encounter with Jack had been a terrifying wake-up call, but it also served as a valuable reminder that in a world where we often aim to help others, we must first ensure our own well-being. A few years back, I found myself in a small town for a weekend getaway. My friends and I had rented a cozy cabin near a picturesque forest. We were excited to explore the area, take long hikes, and immerse ourselves in nature's beauty. One afternoon, we decided to venture deeper into the woods, following a winding trail that led us to an abandoned building. It stood like a forgotten relic, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows broken. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate the eerie structure. As we stepped inside, the air was thick with dust and a sense of isolation. My heart raced, but the adrenaline rush added to the excitement. We wandered through the decrepit rooms, taking photos and speculating about the building's history. Time seemed to fly, and we lost track of how far we had ventured into the decaying structure. That's when I noticed something odd, a faint sound echoing from the distance. It was a barely audible shuffle, like footsteps on a creaky floorboard. I paused, holding my breath to see if my friends have noticed it too, but they seemed oblivious, captivated by the sights around them. Unnerved but not wanting to spoil the fun, I decided to brush off the sound as my imagination playing tricks on me. We continued exploring, but the atmosphere had changed. A feeling of unease gnawed at me, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, sensing that something was amiss. As we ventured deeper into the building, the shuffling sound grew louder. My unease turned into genuine fear, and I couldn't ignore the nagging voice inside my head warning me that we were not alone. I decided to voice my concerns to my friends, hoping they would take me seriously. Just as I was about to speak up, a chilling realization hit me. I could no longer hear my friends' voices. Panic surged through me as I turned around, only to find myself standing alone in a dimly lit hallway. The shuffling sound was now unmistakable and much closer. "Guys," I called out, my voice trembling, "where are you?" No response. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I tried to find my way back to the entrance. The building seemed to have transformed into a maze, with each hallway leading to another dead end. My heart pounded in my chest, and every shadow seemed to be concealing something sinister. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. I turned, half expecting to see my friends, but my blood ran cold when I saw a figure lurking in the shadows. It was a man dressed in tattered clothes, his eyes fixed on me. Fear paralyzed me as I tried to make sense of the situation. How had he gotten in here without us noticing? What were his intentions? I was too far from the entrance, and escape seemed impossible. "Hey," he called out, his voice unnervingly calm. "Don't be afraid, I'm just exploring, like you." His words did little to comfort me. I knew I needed to find my friends and get out of there, but the man blocked my path, making me feel trapped and vulnerable. Summoning all the courage I had left, I decided to make a dash for it. I turned and ran back the way I came, hoping to find my friends and escape together. The man's footsteps echoed behind me, and I pushed myself to run faster. As I turned a corner, I saw a glimpse of daylight, the entrance. Relief washed over me as I burst out of the building, gasping for breath. My friends were waiting outside, concerned looks on their faces. "What happened? Where were you?" they asked. I tried to catch my breath before explaining the encounter with the stranger. They were alarmed and immediately agreed to leave the the abandoned building. We hiked back to the cabin, our hearts still pounding from the ordeal. The incident left a lasting mark on us, reminding us to be cautious even in seemingly harmless explorations. The rest of our weekend retreat was overshadowed by the encounter at the abandoned building. We tried our best to enjoy our time, but the fear lingered, and the once exciting hikes became tinged with trepidation. Back at home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger had followed us, even though there was no concrete evidence to support it. Every little noise at night seemed amplified, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see his face in the shadows. I confided in my friends about my fears, but they reassured me that it was likely just my mind playing tricks on me, haunted by the unsettling experience. They reminded me that the stranger had not followed us back, and that he was probably just a curious individual who happened to be exploring the same abandoned building. I wanted to believe them, but the fear persisted. I started locking all doors and windows, double checking everything before going to bed, and installing security cameras around my home. I felt like a prisoner in my own house, always on edge, unable to fully relax. Days turned into weeks, and the encounter with the stranger remained etched into memory. I tried to move on, to regain the sense of security I once had, but the events of that day had forever changed me. Then, one evening, while watching the local news, my heart skipped a beat. The reporter mentioned a string of unsettling incidents involving a man who had been approaching hikers and campers in the area. The description matched that of the stranger I encountered in the abandoned building. As I listened to the news report, the memories flooded back. The eerie shuffling sounds, the chilling encounter, and the fear that gripped me. I realized that my instincts had been right all along, and my friends and I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation. The authorities were urging anyone with information or similar experiences to come forward. Without hesitation, I contacted the police and shared my account of the encounter. They took my statement seriously and assured me that they would investigate. In the following weeks, the police increased patrols in the area and launched an active search for the man. They warned hikers and campers to be cautious and report any suspicious activity. I felt a sense of relief knowing that the authorities were taking the situation seriously. Months passed and there was no sign of the stranger. The anxiety that had consumed me gradually lessened, but the experience remained a haunting reminder of the importance of trusting our instincts and being vigilant. To this day, I still think about that encounter and the chilling possibility of what might have happened had I not managed to escape. It's a lesson that will stay with me forever. The world can be a beautiful place, but it can also be filled with hidden dangers. It was the summer of 2023, and I was on a road trip across the country, exploring new places and making memories. As dusk settled in, I found myself in a small, desolate town that seemed stuck in time. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I realized it was time to find a place to rest for the night. Driving along the deserted highway, my eyes caught sight of an old, run-down gas station. Its flickering sign hinted at life, but it appeared deserted for years. Desperation overtook my better judgment, and I decided to give it a shot. After all, it was the only sign of civilization for miles around. I parked my car and cautiously approached the station. The creaking sound of the rusted door sent shivers down my spine. I stepped inside, and the musty scent of decay greeted me. The interior was dimly lit, with cobwebs covering every corner. Broken shelves and shattered glass littered the floor, remnants of the place that once thrived. An unsettling feeling washed over me, but I convinced myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks. I called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice echoed through the silence, but there was no response. As I made my way toward the counter, I noticed a flickering light coming from a back room. Curiosity got the better of me, and against my instincts, I approached the source of the light. The door was slightly ajar, and peering inside, I saw a shadowy figure hunched over something. "Hey, is everything okay?" I asked hesitantly. The figure suddenly stopped moving and turned its head slowly to face me. It was a man, but his appearance was unsettling. His eyes were wide and vacant, and a crooked smile stretched across his face. He didn't respond, but rather continued to stare at me in an eerie silence. Feeling a rush of anxiety, I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Without uttering a word, I retreated to the front of the gas station. I decided it was time to leave, but as I turned to exit, the man suddenly appeared in the doorway, blocking my path. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my car keys. He stood there, still grinning like a malevolent specter. My mind raced with fear, imagining the worst scenarios. I managed to keep my voice steady as I spoke. "I'm leaving now. I don't want any trouble." His grin widened, sending chills down my spine. "You can't leave," he murmured, his voice sending shivers through the air. "Nobody ever leaves this place." I could feel his words like an icy grip on my soul, but I couldn't let myself succumb to the terror. Summoning all the courage I had, I made a run for it, pushing past the man and sprinting to my car. I could hear his unnerving laughter echoing behind me as I drove away, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Over the following days, my road trip took on a more cautious and vigilant tone, and every time I passed an abandoned building or a desolate area, the memory of the eerie gas station would resurface, sending shivers down down my spine. It was as if the encounter had left an indelible mark on my psyche, a constant reminder of the inexplicable and the dangers that might lie in the unknown. As I drove through various towns and landscapes, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something deeper and darker beneath the surface of these seemingly ordinary places. I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of unusual activity or anything that might indicate a connection to the enigmatic gas station. However, I found nothing concrete, just my own unease. With time, the memory of that fateful night began to fade slightly, but I couldn't forget the haunting stare of the man I encountered or the bone-chilling feeling of being trapped in that forsaken gas station. The incident played like a broken record in my mind, and I found myself delving into research during my travels, seeking any clues or urban legends that might explain what I had experienced. Through online forums and local stories, I stumbled upon a handful of tales that eerily mirrored my own encounter. Whispers of a wandering gas station began to surface, a place said to appear when and where you least expected it. According to these accounts, the station was a portal to an otherworldly realm where time and reality twisted in inexplicable ways. These stories were both intriguing and terrifying, but they felt more like campfire tales than reality. Still, the coincidences were hard to ignore. People spoke of unsettling encounters with the station's mysterious occupants, describing them as otherworldly beings who seemed to be stuck in a time loop, reliving the same moments over and over again. Determined to find some answers, I decided to revisit the town where I encountered the gas station. This time, I was prepared, equipped with a camera, a voice recorder, and a journal to document any strange occurrences. As I approached the area, an eerie silence enveloped me, making my heart race in anticipation. The town looked just as desolate as before, but the gas station was nowhere to be found. Its absence only deepened the mystery. I began to interview locals, discreetly inquiring about the abandoned station and the strange occurrences in the area. Most people dismissed my questions as idle curiosity, but a few shared cryptic stories that only fueled my intrigue. One elderly man, who appeared to be hesitant to speak, eventually shared a chilling tale. He recounted a legend that had been passed down through generations in the town, speaking of an ancient curse that bound the land to a realm of restless spirits. According to the story, the gas station was a nexus, a thin veil between our world and the ethereal plane, where lost souls wandered aimlessly. As the day turned to dusk, I decided to spend the night in the town, hoping to witness anything out of the ordinary. I parked my car near the area where the gas station had once stood and set up my equipment. The hours crept by slowly, and my mind began to play tricks on me as I imagined shadows moving in the darkness. Just as I was considering giving up, a faint, ethereal glow appeared in the distance. My heart skipped a beat as the glow intensified, taking the shape of an old-fashioned gas station sign. It couldn't be. The gas station was gone, but there it was, materializing before my eyes like a haunting apparition. My hands trembled as I started recording and photographing the eerie scene. The sign flickered, and the station seemed to waver like a mirage. As I approached, I could hear faint whispers carried by the wind, voices of the lost and the restless. Against my better judgment, I entered the station, drawn by an inexplicable force. Inside, time seemed to lose its meaning, and the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. The same hunched figure from before emerged from the shadows, still wearing that haunting smile. This time, I resisted the urge to flee. Instead, I mustered all my courage and asked the question that had been haunting me since that night. What is this place? Who are you? The figure's vacant eyes locked onto mine, and his voice echoed with a strange mixture of sorrow and malevolence. We are the forgotten, the ones trapped between worlds. We yearn for release, but the curse binds us here. In that moment, I felt a surge of empathy for the lost souls trapped in this timeless purgatory. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a way to freedom, to break the curse that held them captive. As I continued to explore the gas station, I found old journals and artifacts, shedding light on the history of the place and the people who once inhabited it. It became clear that the station was more than just a gateway. It was a focal point for lost souls and unresolved mysteries, a limbo that held them in perpetual torment. But before I could uncover more, a powerful gust of wind swept through the station, and the apparitions began to fade. The figure warned me to leave before it was too late, as if the station itself was closing its doors to our world once more. With a heavy heart, I stepped back out into the night, the gas station vanishing behind me. As I drove away, I knew that my encounter with the wandering gas station had changed me forever. I now carried the burden of knowing about the lost souls stuck in that timeless purgatory, yearning for freedom. Though I might never have all the answers or fully comprehend the mysteries of that place, I couldn't forget the haunting faces and voices that echoed in my mind. The encounter had opened my eyes to a hidden world that existed just beyond our perception, a world of forgotten souls and inexplicable occurrences. And it was a world I could never let myself forget, no matter how much I wished to leave it behind. This chilling encounter took place not too long ago, and the memory still sends shivers down my spine. I was an avid nature lover and enjoyed taking long walks in the woods near my house. It was my way of escaping the stress of everyday life and finding solace in the tranquil beauty of nature. One evening, unable to sleep, I decided to take a late night walk in the forest. It was a clear night, and the moonlight cast an eerie glow over the trees, creating strange shapes and shadows that seemed to dance around me as I walked. As I meandered through the familiar trails, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rustling leaves and distant sounds of wildlife didn't seem as soothing as they usually did. However, I dismissed my unease, attributing it to my restless state of mind. The further I ventured into the woods, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, but my heart continued to pound in my chest. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind. Hello, is someone there? I called out, trying to sound brave. Silence greeted me, but the unsettling feeling didn't subside. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach a more populated area, but the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. My anxiety was reaching its peak, and I considered turning back, but something kept urging me forward. Finally, as I approached a clearing, I saw him, a tall, shadowy figure standing at the edge of the trees. My blood turned to ice, and I couldn't move. The moonlight revealed his silhouette, but his face remained hidden in the darkness. Who are you? What do you want? I stammered, my voice trembling. The stranger didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step toward me, and I felt my fight or flight response kick in. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body felt frozen in place. Just then, a sudden burst of courage surged through me. I turned and sprinted back the way I had come, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't dare look back, fearing what I might see. As I ran, the whispering sounds seemed to follow me, growing louder and more menacing. It was as if the forest itself was taunting me, playing tricks on my mind. The trees swayed eerily in the wind, and the shadows seemed to come alive with malevolence. Finally, I burst out of the woods and into the safety of the streetlights that lined the nearby road. I glanced back one last time, but there was no sign of the mysterious figure. My heart was still racing, and I struggled to catch my breath. I hurried back home, vowing never to venture into those woods again at night. The encounter had left me shaken and questioning my sanity. I wondered if I had stumbled upon some dangerous individual or if my mind had played tricks on me in the darkness. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, I reported the incident to the local authorities. They assured me they would increase patrols in the area, but they found no evidence of anyone lurking in the woods. The weeks that followed the eerie encounter were filled with anxiety and sleepless nights. The memory of the shadowy figure lurking in the woods plagued my thoughts, leaving me on edge even in the safety of my own home. I began to question whether I should have reported the incident to the authorities, fearing that I might have drawn attention to myself from someone with ill intentions. To ease my restless mind, I confided in a close friend about the strange encounter. She listened attentively, offering reassurance and understanding. She encouraged me to join her on walks during the day, hoping that the presence of a companion would help ease my fears. Despite my lingering unease, I decided to give it a try. We strolled through the familiar forest trails, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting a warm glow on the surroundings. With my friend by my side, I felt a glimmer of the comfort and tranquility I used to find in these woods. As we walked, my friend shared her own stories of feeling uneasy in certain places and how she coped with those feelings. It was a relief to know that I wasn't alone in my fears, and her support helped me regain some of my lost confidence. However, my unease returned as the sun began to set, reminding me of the unnerving encounter that had occurred under the moonlit sky. I could feel the grip of fear tightening once again, and I was ready to call it a day and head back home. But just as we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something familiar in the distance, a tall, dark figure standing among the trees. My heart pounded, and I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. Was this the same person from before? How had they found me again? I clung to my friend, whispering urgently, "Do you see that? It's him." My friend looked in the direction I was pointing, but when she turned back to me, her face was puzzled. "I don't see anyone. Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, concern etched on her features. Doubt gnawed at my might. Had my fear conjured up the figure once more? Was it a trick of the fading light? My friend's reassurance did little to calm my racing heart. Reluctantly, we decided to continue our walk, but the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. My eyes darted around the trees, half expecting the shadowy figure to emerge at any moment. I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being followed, even though I had no concrete evidence. As we neared the exit of the forest, a sudden rustling in the underbrush caused us both to jump. I turned around, fully expecting to see the figure charging at us, but instead, it was a startled deer leaping away into the trees. My friend gave me a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. "It's okay. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, especially after experiencing something frightening," she said soothingly. I nodded, trying to rationalize my fear. Perhaps it had all been in my imagination. Maybe the first encounter had heightened my senses, making me more prone to see things that weren't there. Over the following weeks, I continued to explore the woods during the day, gradually regaining some of the peace and and tranquility I had once associated with them. The memory of the eerie encounters still lingered, but it no longer consumed me. While I couldn't entirely explain the strange experiences I had, I learned to trust my instincts while also acknowledging the power of imagination. Sometimes fear can take on a life of its own, creating shadows where there are none. The woods remained a place of solace and adventure, but I always made sure to heed the lessons learned from those late night encounters. And though the unsettling memories occasionally resurfaced, they also served as a reminder of the strength I found in overcoming my fear, and reclaiming the beauty of the natural world once more. This unsettling story happened to me during my first year of college when I moved into a shared apartment near campus. The apartment complex seemed like a typical college housing option, nothing out of the ordinary. Little did I know that my new roommate would turn my life upside down. At first, everything seemed normal. I was excited to start this new chapter of my life and looked forward to getting to know my roommate better. Let's call her Sarah. She was friendly, cheerful, and we hit it off right away. However, as the days passed, I noticed peculiarities about her behavior that left me feeling uneasy. Sarah had a habit of disappearing for long stretches without any explanation. At times, she would be out for days without a word, and then she would return as if nothing had happened. When I asked about her whereabouts, she would brush it off, claiming she was visiting friends or spending time at her family's place. As weeks turned into months, her absences became more frequent, and she began to withdraw from our circle of friends. It was as if she had a secret life outside of the apartment, one she didn't want anyone to know about. One evening, as I was studying in my room, I overheard Sarah talking on the phone. She spoke in hushed tones, and although I couldn't make out the details, her conversation sounded intense and secretive. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. Curiosity got the best of me, and one day, while she was out, I decided to look around her room. I felt guilty invading her privacy, but my gut feeling told me that I needed to find out what was going on. Inside her room, I found stacks of notebooks filled with what seemed to be coded writings and obscure symbols. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. The room was cluttered with strange trinkets and items that seemed to hold hidden meanings. My heart raced as I realized I had stumbled upon something much deeper and more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I didn't know what to make of it all, but I knew that Sarah was involved in something that went far beyond ordinary college life. Despite my fears, I didn't confront Sarah directly. Instead, I discreetly asked around campus, trying to gather information about her mysterious activities. Some mentioned her involvement in strange rituals and gatherings late at night, while others spoke of her fascination with the occult. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. The more I delved into the mystery, the more I feared for my safety. I didn't know who I could trust or what secrets Sarah might be hiding. One night, as I lay awake in my bed, I heard muffled voices and chanting coming from the living room. Fear gripped my heart, and I realized that Sarah had brought her secretive practices into our apartment. I decided that I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my belongings in a haste, making sure to leave no trace behind, and moved out without saying a word to Sarah. I found a new place to live, far away from the darkness that had enveloped my old apartment. After moving out of the apartment, I tried my best to put the unsettling experience behind me. I focused on my studies and surrounded myself with friends who brought positivity into my life. Still, the memory of Sarah and her mysterious activities lingered in the back of my mind like a haunting shadow. As the months passed, rumors about Sarah's bizarre behavior spread around campus. Some claimed to have witnessed her participating in peculiar ceremonies late at night, while others spoke of strange symbols and writings she would display in public places. I found solace in confiding in a close friend who had known Sarah before she became reclusive. To my surprise, my friend admitted that she had also noticed peculiar changes in Sarah's behavior during their time as roommates. She had moved out early on, feeling uncomfortable around Sarah's newfound fascination with the occult. We couldn't help but wonder what had happened to Sarah to lead her down such an unusual and unsettling path. Some speculated that she had fallen in with a fringe group, while others believed she might have encountered something dark and dangerous during her absences from the apartment. Despite our curiosity, we knew better than to delve further into Sarah's secrets. It was clear that whatever she was involved in had the potential to be harmful, and we were not equipped to confront such mysterious forces. In an attempt to find closure, we decided to reach out to Sarah's family. We discovered that she had cut off communication with them, leaving them deeply concerned about her well-being. They were as puzzled and worried as we were, desperate to understand the changes in their daughter. Months turned into a year, and Sarah's strange presence became more like a ghostly legend around campus. Few had seen her, and those who had reported that she seemed like a shell of her former self. herself. It was as if she had become a different person entirely. One day, an email circulated campus announcing that Sarah had withdrawn from the university. No explanation was given, leaving us all to wonder what had happened to her. Her abrupt departure only added to the air of mystery that surrounded her. As time passed, the rumors about Sarah's occult involvement subsided, but the unsettling memories remained etched in the minds of those who had encountered her during that dark chapter. I eventually graduated and moved on with my life, but I couldn't help but feel a tinge of sadness for Sarah. Whatever path she had chosen led her to a place of isolation and darkness, and I hoped that one day she would find her way back to the light. The encounter with Sarah changed me in profound ways. It taught me to be cautious about the people I trust and to listen to my intuition when something feels off. I realized that some mysteries are not meant to be solved and that it's okay to walk away from situations that bring discomfort and fear. The story of Sarah and her enigmatic journey is a haunting reminder that the human mind is a labyrinth of secrets, and sometimes we can never fully comprehend what lies within another person's soul. As the years pass, her memory remains a reminder that some encounters can forever alter the course of our lives, leaving us with more questions than answers and a deeper appreciation for the fragility of our own minds. This happened over 10 years ago, so excuse me if the details are a little fuzzy. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to sleep over. We made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We go out to our friend's apartment, have some fun, and around midnight we decide it's time for us to head back. But when we ask to be taken back, everyone says no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. Everyone said they were too drunk or too high, so we eventually decided to just start walking back, and we would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way back. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex, so we start making our way to the entrance. We don't even get halfway there before a car slowly starts rolling up behind us. I was 15 or 16 at the time, and very naive to the ways of the world, so I wasn't too concerned, but Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She tells me to start walking faster, so we start walking faster. The car also picks up their pace behind us. Again, she tells me to walk faster, so we start moving as fast as we can, and that's when the car pulled slightly in front of us and two of the passenger doors open and two men get out. Realizing there's no walking faster to get out of this situation, she instructs me to run now, so she takes off running and I follow her. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind a pickup truck, and for a minute we hope and pray that we weren't spotted. This is where details get a little fuzzy. One of them must have gotten back in the car at some point, as there's only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear a set of footsteps quickly approaching, and she quietly indicates that we're now going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're hiding behind. He's circling the truck looking for us, and we're slowly and quietly circling it on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of the gods, he gives up and decides to go back to the car with his friends. This is our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably only 15 to 20 seconds. We find the pool house area and find a spot to hide. We were headed behind some fences and bushes and were anxiously waiting to see if they discover us. Their car pulls around to the pool house and we're biting our nails hoping they don't stop and get out. The car slowly drives away and we realize we haven't been spotted. We were safe for now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours and hours and hours. They weren't giving up on looking for us. We were safe for the time being, but now we needed to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys we went to hang out with, so short shorts and revealing tops. We were freezing. We found a dirty, disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled up under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but no one answered our calls. None of our friends answered our calls. We felt completely alone and hopeless, but around 5 in the morning someone finally answered and said they would pick us up. The best news I had ever heard in my life. Our friend gets to the apartment complex but can't find the pool house. The group of men are still constantly circling around, so there's no way we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is at with a little detective work, figuring out what building they're facing, what's in front of them, are there dumpsters nearby, clues like that. We figure out where they're at, so we make a run for it. We spot their car and hop in as fast as we can. Go, go, go. We tell them and our friend speeds off towards the entrance. We pass the group of men on the way out, and that was the last we saw of them. We made it back around 6 in the morning, just in time to sneak back in without my parents ever knowing we even left. If Claire hadn't been with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted or possibly killed. So thankful for Claire and our friend that picked us up, but a big screw you to the adult men we went to hang out with as teenagers, and especially screw you to the guys that intended to harm us. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I was 15 years old living in a medium-sized city in North Florida. It has about 60,000 people, but some areas were really spread out and rural. Don't think of it like New York City or anything, more like a lot of houses spread out over a huge area and condensed shopping centers. I was a bit of a punk that my parents had a hard time controlling, so that meant I basically snuck out constantly and was always riding my bike around the city all hours of the night with my friends, fighting and constantly causing trouble. For reference, I was probably 5'10" and 150 pounds. My next door neighbors were my best friends. Let's call them Nick and Tim. Nick was younger than us at probably 5'5" and 140 pounds, and Tim was 5'8" and easily 210 pounds. Nick and Tim were brothers only a year or so apart. On that night, Tim had texted me around 1 in the morning asking me to ride bikes with him and his brother to his girlfriend's house so he can get lucky. I remember being hesitant because of how long the bike ride was. I just looked it up and it was 9.5 miles from my house to her street. But Tim begged me to go until I agreed. Our city had a curfew, meaning any police in the area that saw you and assumed you were a minor would stop you and possibly issue you a ticket and bring you home. That meant we had to be careful about being seen by cars going by. Well, the bike ride to her house went by without any issues. We took our time, joked around, smoked a little pot, and genuinely just enjoyed the ride together. We ran out of what little pot we had on the way and finally got to his girlfriend's house. After what felt like an hour, Tim snuck around the back to go in, and Nick and I just sat on an electrical box and talked. Maybe 30 minutes went by and Tim triumphantly snuck out of the house bragging about his time in there and says we should head out. Annoyed at how long it took and nearly sober, we both agreed. The first mile of the ride went by smoothly, but things changed. We had just passed a decent sized shopping center which was closed and a church. We rode by it slowly in zero rush at all. After we passed it, it led to a long stretch of road with woods and canals on each side. The road had 2 lanes on each side separated by palm trees and landscaping in the middle, sidewalks on both sides, and on the right side another road connects to the parkway. We were riding on the right hand sidewalk. Off in the distance we saw a very tall older man wearing a yellow raincoat and a large backpack. He was walking back and forth on the sidewalk under a street light on the corner of the parkway and the side street. We all went silent as we got closer. I don't think he could have seen or heard us as there were no lights over us and there were sprinklers going off in the median. I remember hearing him dragging his feet across the ground and mumbling. He was dragging his feet almost like he was trying to brush away the concrete to find something underneath it. The mumbling was incoherent and frantic. Honestly, it made my heart sink and my stomach knot up. I couldn't understand anything he was saying, and the only way to go to get home was to go by him. Nick said let's cross the street and get onto the other sidewalk. Tim and I agreed. I remember this so distinctly. We crossed the landscaped median and a jet of sprinkler water hit me directly in the face and got into my mouth and my eyes. It smelled like sulfur and tasted horribly. On the other side we could hear the mumbling and scraping of his feet clearer. I could now see more details about him. He was smoking a cigarette and was probably 6'5", had on a huge green backpack, was extremely skinny, had long gray hair, was wearing combat boots and blue ripped jeans, and that he had a full white beard. He didn't seem to notice us until we were directly across from him. We all had our eyes locked in his direction when he suddenly stopped walking, talking and scraping his feet, looked up from the ground and let out this god-awful screech. It was like he tried to say 100 words at once. None of us knew what he tried to say. After the initial scream, I could make out "What are you doing?" It startled us. We were now 25 yards away from him and then he screams, "What are you looking at?" I was a foolish teenager. I piped up to say something smart and Tim riding next to me grabbed onto me and said don't say a word. So I didn't, and in hindsight I am so glad I didn't. He kept screaming in our direction and we kept riding. The further we rode, the fainter the screaming got. Then it stopped. They crossed the street again to the other side and made it about a mile down the road, all of us on edge. We glanced over our shoulders constantly to make sure he wasn't following us. We talked briefly about it and how strange it was, but we were glad it was over with, or so we thought. Nick and Tim were riding in front of me when I thought I heard something behind me. I turned around and there he was, maybe an arm's length away, headed directly for me. The yellow raincoat hood was pulled up over his head and buttoned. This guy was standing up on his mountain bike pedaling as hard as he could. We locked eyes and he started screaming. I made scream it. He screamed not words, not any language, a constant scream as loud as he could. I have the chills writing this even even now, as a 25-year-old grown man with a wife and a baby. I screamed he's right behind us and stood up pedaling as hard as I could. I think we all did. And he was right behind us the whole time, screaming. Every so often he would get right on top of us, screaming and trying to knock us off of our bikes. I don't know how long we rode with him behind us, but it felt like eternity. I think age played a factor because he must have got tired and let us get ahead a bit. Exhausted, we pulled into a neighborhood and stared cutting through yards trying to lose him. We jumped off our bikes and all just decided if he's still chasing us, we were going to make our stand together and fight. It was like a hive mind decision. All too tired to keep running, it was our only option. We waited for him, but he never came. I don't even remember hearing him. I still can't recall when we lost him. I called my house phone, waking both my parents up in the process, and told my dad about the situation. He told me to get home and figure it out. I asked to talk to my mother, and she yelled at me on the phone and refused to come pick us up as I stood in the middle of the street hoping this crackhead didn't come and kill us all. I got home with Nick and Tim in tow, who asked if they could crash in my room. Of course I said yes. I think we all still have some weird feelings about that night, and we never really spoke of it again. I don't know what he wanted. He was clearly on drugs, but it makes me wonder if he would have robbed us or worse. 2 weeks ago, my fiance, who is 24, and my future father-in-law, who is 53 years old, and myself, who is also 24 years old, take a little road trip to pick up some jazz cabbage in a different state as we live in a dry state. The drive up was uneventful as per usual. However, on the way back home, we had passed a slower moving vehicle, which was a white truck. We were coming into a town where the speed came from 45 to 35 miles per hour. As we start to slow, this white truck nearly rams into the back of us. I am sitting in the back at this point and turn to look over my shoulder and can see the white truck swerved into the other lane to avoid hitting us. At this point, my future father-in-law is the one driving and motions a what the heck gesture to the truck behind us. The driver of the white truck proceeds to tell him to pull over. My future father-in-law, being a hothead, obliges and pulls over. He steps out of the vehicle and says some colorful language towards the other car. The driver of the white truck is also out of his vehicle and walking up into my future father-in-law's face. At this point, my fiance steps out and I follow. I see things getting heated between these two men and I throw myself in between them. Everything next happens so fast, I'm going to try my best to recapture. As I'm between everyone, the driver of the white truck pushes past me and shoves my future father-in-law. This gets my fiance to step in, hey, don't push my dad, to try and split them up. Next thing we see is the other passenger in the vehicle, who is easily in his 40s and close to 500 pounds, sucker punch my fiance, who is 225 pounds. You just punched me. Somehow I get pushed to the ground and my guys are fighting the other guys. Fists are flying. They're rolling down into the ditch. The guy that was 500 pounds is on my fiance, pulling his hair and scratching him. Now, I'm against jumping, but this man had 300 pounds on my man. I jump in, I start punching and kicking and doing anything I can to get this man off of him. My future father-in-law is quaking the main guy in the other vehicle in a chokehold. He can see that we're struggling with the big guy and forgets the main guy to hit the other guy in the face until he got off my fiance. Cops were called. Everyone was separated. The party in the white truck decided not to press charges. We agreed to not press charges and were sent on our way. So did the men in the white truck. Let's not meet again. Recently, I moved out of my apartment. I simply had to because I didn't feel safe with my landlords. I lived in this really nice apartment in Brooklyn for a few months with my roommate, who paid for most of the rent since her parents are super rich. Our landlords were actually this seemingly really sweet couple who lived a few floors above with their kids. The first few weeks were somewhat normal except for the fact that every time I saw their kids in the elevator they would scream at me before they got off and then just ran away. I thought it was funny and cute at first, but then their eldest son came to visit and started doing the same thing. And he looked about my age. I didn't really think much of it since maybe he was just playing with his younger siblings. Stuff got weird really when I bumped into all of them together and we talked for a bit. Out of nowhere, while we were having a pleasant conversation, the dad apologized to me saying that his son might act strange because he's got some screws loose. I was pretty shocked with him just saying that out of the blue. I paused for a bit and I can't really remember what I said, but remember just wanting to get out of this conversation now. A few days later, I bumped into the dad again in the elevator. I was pretty weirded out and he was just talking about how great my apartment is and how much of a generous guy he is for giving us such a low rate. Then he asked if I could babysit his kids as he and his wife and his eldest son would be at a dinner. I said no at first, but he counter-offered saying he'd pay $150 an hour, and being the greedy idiot that I am, I agreed. This is where I screwed up. When I get to his place, I was speechless. His apartment wrapped around the entire floor of the building. It was the nicest apartment I will ever see, that's for sure. About an hour and everything was normal. I was playing some fighting game with his kids when we suddenly heard the front door slam. I told them to stay there as I peeked to see what was going on, and I see the dad falling all over the the place, clearly drunk. He started walking toward me and at the last minute fell face first onto his couch. I must have popped a blood vessel trying to hold in my laughter. I asked if he was okay and walked over to assist him. He then turned around, looked at me and said my wife will let us, please. When I tried asking, his wife walked up to me, thanked me, paid me, and told me to come back another time. I just kinda went back to my apartment in shock, wondering what just happened, and I definitely wasn't going back. I told my roommate and she told me that she also bumped into the dad and he told her my wife is cool, just so you know, with no explanation, and just left. At this point we knew that we sure were not renewing our lease. We didn't see our landlords until our final month. We kinda joked to our friends about how our landlords were creepy cooks. The next time I see them was actually with my boyfriend, who was well aware of what they were trying to do. It was an intensely awkward elevator ride, as when they saw us in there they just went quiet and smiled and nodded at us repeatedly. As we step out the elevator, the dad shouts hey to us and winks at me as the doors closed. After that I asked my boyfriend to stay with us for the remainder of our lease calls. At this point my roommate and I were freaked out. Our final and creepiest encounter was a few days before moving out. My roommate walked out the apartment and both the landlords were sitting in front of the elevators waiting for us. She said they started sobbing when they saw her and then begged us to stay. They apparently apologized for making us uncomfortable and said they thought we were the pretty young girls they were waiting for. She didn't say a word to them and got on the elevator and called me to warn me they were outside, and then they started to knock. My boyfriend answered and said when the guy saw me asked if I was here. Of course my boyfriend said no, but they tried walking in anyway. I walk out my room saying I'll call the police if they don't leave, and they beg me to not and run out the apartment. A few days ago, we get a text from a random number saying we could live there 6 months free if we just gave them a few nights. Of course, blocked and deleted. The whole thing was such an uncomfortable experience living there all those months, especially knowing they had keys to our apartment. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Yesterday I took my son fishing. He wanted to go to a nearby lake that we haven't been to in quite some time. It's not known to be a great area. It's known to be a late night hookup spot as well as a late night drug deal location. Due to the lake's reputation, I had made a deal with my dad that I wouldn't stay there past 4 in the afternoon without him. On to the story now. My 12-year-old son, who looks much younger than he is, and I pulled up at our favorite fishing spot, a small pond on the opposite side of the road as the lake. Almost immediately, an older gentleman approached us asking if there were fish in the pond. I replied that we had just gotten started, so nothing yet, but that we had caught fish in the pond on plenty of other occasions. He thanked us for the information and returned to his spot on the other side of the road. About 15 minutes later, another younger man approaches the older man with a dog. I can see and hear them chatting, but they've made no move to involve us in the conversation, which I'm glad for. I just want to enjoy a day with my son. Unfortunately, the water in the pond was incredibly low and murky, and I could tell we weren't going to have any luck. I tell my son to pack it up and we'll try another spot on the other side of the lake. As we begin packing our gear into the trunk, the younger man yells over sorry if my dog and I ran you off. I tell him it's no problem and we were simply moving to a better fishing spot. He then starts telling me how nice it is to see a mom taking her kid fishing and how you don't see that very often. I get this a lot, so I'm pretty used to it. We have a short conversation about it as I pack up, and I then move towards the driver's side doors to depart. Before I can leave, the younger man starts up another conversation, this time asking me how old I think he is. This feels strange to me, but I'm nice to a fault sometimes, so I answer his question. I tell him I'm a horrible judge of age, but maybe 25. He tells me he's 38 and I'm too kind, and I laugh it off saying something like I work with teenagers, so they always guess me well above my age just to be mean. He asks where I work and I stupidly tell him my city. Turns out he lives there too and starts going on and on about how he got a free apartment on such and such street because his baby mama kicked him out of their house. I think he's talking about some kind of government assistance program. Weird flex, but okay man. At this point, I'm standing by the car door with my hand on the handle and my son is already in the back seat. This guy can't take the hint and starts telling me all about his awful baby mama and how women are supposed to be submissive, quiet, and do what they're told. He specifically said, I mean, it's cool that you can bait a hook or whatever, but you're still a woman. Now my alarm bells are blaring. This guy struck up a conversation by commending me for doing a typically dad thing with my kid. Now he's putting me down for the same thing. He's gone from being overly friendly and complimentary to agitated and ranting. I should have been rude and just got in the car and left, but I've unfortunately been conditioned, like many women, to be polite even when we're uncomfortable. Instead, I start making comments in the hopes he'll see I'm not some meek submissive woman who's going to agree with him. After all, I'm a tatted up chick with an eyebrow piercing and 2 lip piercings. I don't exactly look like a submissive little housewife. I guess I was trying to make him just as uncomfortable as he made me in the hopes he'd leave me alone. After he says women shouldn't be loud or opinionated, I tell him, oh, well, he wouldn't like me at all. He tries to backpedal saying, I mean, it's okay to be loud I guess, but don't try that with your man, you know. I say my man doesn't tell me anything. I do what I want. This kind of back and forth goes on for a while before he finally shakes his head and says I just don't understand what kind of woman would act like that. I reply a strong one. As soon as the words left my mouth, the older gentleman yells from his spot on the bank, yeah, say that again honey. This distracted the creep long enough for me to hop in the car and lock the doors. I still don't feel safe though. Unbeknownst to the creep, only 2 of my car doors actually have functioning locks, but at least they're the 2 on his side. I put the key in the ignition and turn. No dice. Nothing. Of all the times for my car to act up, it chooses now. Panic has now set in. As I repeatedly try to start my car, I can see him out of the corner of my eye. He's taken notice of my car troubles and is trying to get my attention. As he takes a few steps towards my car, the engine finally roars to life and I peel out of there. Only then do I let my composure crumble and have a long talk with my son about what just happened. To the older gentleman who took notice of my discomfort and provided a distraction, I'd gladly meet with you again any day. When I was in my late teens, I worked at a little coffee shop in my city. This was around the time that smartphones hit the scene. I had just got my first phone and laptop recently around this time. Anyway, we had this one regular customer who was very eccentric. He made me really uncomfortable if I am being honest. He had strange vibes. It was in the middle of a scorching summer and he always wore many layers in a large parka with faux fur trim and sunglasses. I never once saw his eyes. He would get out of his car and run for the door in his big coat, shielding himself from the sun. He always ordered almost every item on the menu, but always said it was not for him and he didn't like the food there personally. One day he came in and ordered the whole menu as per usual. I was checking him out at the cash register and he leaned in and softly said to me, "You seem like a nice young woman. I need to warn you about something. I'm not supposed to tell anyone, but it honestly bothers my conscience keeping this information to myself." "What is it?" I asked. "Do you have a computer or smartphone?" He asked. "Yes, I just got one," I answered. "Get rid of them immediately," he said sternly. Was that?" I asked. "I have a friend who has certain government ties. Nothing is private. The government will be monitoring everything and it's all permanent." He told me that they are planning to put up concentration type camps in some major United States cities. They will use the info on your cell phones to decide who will go and where they will go. I've gotten rid of everything that can be traced and I'm planning on running away soon. Please be safe," he urged. He left and I kinda just shrugged him off as a crazy person, but it still weighed heavy on my mind a while. I went on to leave that job and got a job as a hostess at a restaurant. A year passed by and I'd pretty much forgot about that whole encounter until one we would cross paths again. I was at the front host stand where I greet and see guests arriving at the restaurant when a limousine pulls up and a man gets out accompanied by 2 large bodyguards at his side. It was the guy from the coffee shop. This time he was wearing a sleek tuxedo and the same sunglasses. He enters the building and says, "You remember me?" I said I did. He said, "Do you remember what I said?" Again I told him yes. He proceeds to pass the host stand and he examines every inch of the restaurant as if he was looking for something. He then signals his bodyguards to follow him to the door. Before exiting the building, he says, looking back at me, "Don't forget." He then got back in the limousine and I never saw him again after that. It was the strangest thing ever because he knew he'd find me there. But how did he find me at my new job? Perhaps he asked someone at my old job, but still, why go out of your way to make some flashy appearance like this? I was just thinking of this and wondering whatever became of that man and who he was. I was talking about this with my mom a couple weeks ago. Then I was telling a longtime friend. It's something that has always stuck with me, mostly because I don't know what came of the case. I was never called to testify, still don't know what happened or why I was stalked for months and then almost kidnapped. But now I think I have possibly found one answer. This happened in Texas. I was an 11-year-old girl at the time and we had a family friend's daughter living with us. I also have an older brother. Both of them were in high school into the school year, so they had after school things going on. My mom was working for our school transportation. She still works there. My dad also was working in Dallas. I wasn't always by myself, only 2 days a week. Never long either, maybe an hour. We lived in what we call the boondocks, nothing but back roads at that time with few houses in one direction town and the other. We lived out in the country about 2 miles from town. Our driveway was very long, about 1/8 of a mile. One day happens to be a day that I was by myself and remember seeing a red or maroon 4-door car with a man and a woman sitting in it about a mile from my house. On the road we lived on, if you came from the town outside, we were the last house with the longest driveway. The bus always came from the other direction, the back road side, so you would pass like a trailer park. Best way to describe it because that's what it reminds me of, but the house aren't like side by side but plenty of houses. You pass that and there are no other houses until you come to mine. The car was sitting in between the trailer park and my house. So I get home from school and I get off the bus and see the car driving up behind the bus. So I kinda take off in a sprint because I didn't feel right about them, just got a feeling. I get about halfway up the driveway. I turn around and the car is sitting at the end of my driveway in the road watching me. So then I take off running to the house and get in and lock the door. I go to a window and look out noticing they're gone. When my mom and the other two get home, I tell them what happened. We make a police report. Almost every day for the first week, even when the other two were with me, we saw the car. They didn't do anything creepy when they were home, but they were still there every day. When I was by myself, they would do the same thing, sit and watch me. Well, I'm assuming they caught onto the routine of after school things. I only saw them after the first week on the days the two wouldn't be with me. Not only myself, but my bus driver noticed the car got closer to my house each day. One day they were so close to my house, I mean like right at the driveway, that the bus driver dropped me off and sat at the end of my driveway until I got close enough to the house to be safe. He did that every time we saw the car. This went on for about 2 months. Well, one night, it was a weekend. To this day, I still like to sit outside to listen to music. So I'm sitting outside listening to my boombox. I hear a car door slam, so I still look around. Again, we lived in the country, so the road and surrounding area is pitch black. Expect the cow pasture to our left had one light like a street light, so he had paid to have it put in, not sure why, I'm glad he did. Sitting directly in, but at the end of our driveway is a car. I saw it because of the light in the pasture. It hit the headlights on the car just right. I'm not saying it's the same car and people, but given everything that happened, I'm 85% sure it was them. So I go in and tell my mom someone is sitting at the end of the driveway. Her and my dad go outside and again I hear a car door slam and the car started up and headlights come on. With our long driveway, my parents wouldn't have been able to chase the people down. So of course I couldn't sit outside at night anymore. Fast forward a couple days, maybe a week. No car. So it felt like everything was normal, hoping that was the end of that scary situation. So the bus is dropping me off at home. Our mailbox was across the street, so I went to check it. It was empty. I walk back and I'm in the driveway with my back to the road. I'm still close enough to the main road and out of nowhere I be grabbed from behind by a woman. She doesn't have a good enough grip on me, so I'm able to wiggle kind of free and I punched her in her face. She completely let go of me and I take off running down this forever long driveway. At this time I'm not skinny, I was 185 pounds, so it sucked running up that driveway. But I got home and I hid in my mom's closet until I hear her looking for me. She had this huge walk-in closet that went bathroom to bathroom, so plenty of hiding places. I'm crying and trying to tell her what happened. They call the police. They take a report. That's it. A couple days later, my mom tells me that there was almost another kidnapping in town right up the road from my house. It was a man and a woman in a red car. About a week later, in the next town over, there was almost another kidnapping at the school. A man and a woman in a red car. They were caught. Like I said in the beginning, nothing happened and I was never called to testify, and as far as I know, neither did the other two girls. Never heard anything about it again, and I asked my mom when we talked about it a couple weeks ago. She confirmed that nothing came of it. My kids don't leave the house without me now. I don't leave them by themselves. My oldest is 11 and the world is a nasty place. I don't blame anyone. Back then in a small town, it's not something you hear about happening. We moved down there to get away from the crime rate in Dallas. After they were caught, I was able to have outside time back. It was safe again and I haven't had any other experiences. I trust my oldest, he is a homebody. I can't get him to leave the house to do anything other than leave with me or his dad or school. My middle son loves to be outside, so does my youngest, but I have a fenced in backyard and I live in a community that has older couples. We all watch out for each other. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This happened around 2 years ago. It was during the pandemic at some point, because the mask mandate was still in place at the time. For some context, me and my boyfriend were both 17 at the time. This was the start of our relationship and we didn't live together at this point, so I went to his parents quite frequently to stay over. He lived about a 30-minute drive away, but at the time none of us could drive, so we took the train. I always preferred the train to the bus as it felt safer to me, but this hindered that for a while. It was in November, so it was pretty dark and rainy as it was around 8 at night. seat. We got on the train and sat down kind of adjacent to a man. In those table seats with 4 seats, we were on the one across the aisle from him. Due to COVID restrictions at the time, half of the carriage behind us was closed off, so it was just half of a carriage, but it was pretty quiet apart from a group of like 14-year-olds on the seats in front of us. Anyways, the train starts and everything's fine. However, I did notice that the man was staring just kind of strangely at the younger kids, but I thought I was just being a bit too on edge. After a while, the man started staring at me instead, like really obviously, turned to parallel face us and just stare. I didn't look at him and just kept him in my line of sight while trying to draw my boyfriend's attention to it subtly, as I was starting to get quite anxious. It took a minute of awkwardly trying to point with my eyes before my boyfriend clocked what was happening. But just as he did and looked over at the guy, the man looked at us dead in the face and pulled his mask off and leaned forward and then coughed obnoxiously at us. At this point, I just kind of stared at my boyfriend and kind of laughed it off and started talking about something else to try and get the man's attention off of us because he just gave me a really weird feeling. The man then said what's so funny, to which I ignored. We just ignored him the rest of the journey, but I was really nervous. I just felt like he was going to do something weird. Then after a while, the train was coming up to our stop. My boyfriend stood up and started to walk towards the doors, which were far away from where we were, as technically due to half the cart being closed. We were at the back. I was still like starting to stand up at this point, still in the booth on the back side, and the man stood up and then just stood right in front of where I was, blocking me from getting out and towering over me pretty much. At this point, I was really starting to panic and could feel myself starting to hyperventilate, but I told myself I'm just overthinking it, and he is just being a jerk and nothing more, and glanced around to try and see my boyfriend, but there were a few people now blocking the way. The guy stood there for like 2 minutes and completely ignored when I said excuse me, to the point I had to squeeze past nervously, to which he immediately turned around and followed behind. I finally caught up to my boyfriend near the first set of doors, the part that's a bit more open with the smaller fold down seats but still on the train carriage. The man still didn't pass us despite us moving right to the edge to let him go ahead. At this point, the train had arrived and stopped completely, and my boyfriend went through the first doors to where he was now in the smaller section between carriages waiting on the door to open. Before I could even move to follow him, the man went into the same area and stood right up against my boyfriend, like fully pressing himself against him while he turns his head to just again stare right at me. It was so weird. At this point, I was just confused and nervous, so I just leaned forward and grabbed my boyfriend's hand and pulled him towards me back into the main area of the train. The guy, again, just stood there. He didn't get off the train or move to sit back down, so my boyfriend pulled me past it and we got off. Now, I was really panicking at this point, and it had been since he blocked me in. I was visibly shaken up, and I considered speaking to the train ticket person who was away at the front of the train outside, but I thought I was being silly, and really he didn't do anything, and my boyfriend was really calm about it, so we just continued home. The way to my boyfriend's is like a 5-minute walk. There are 2 routes when you get off the train, a long way and a short way. The short way is easier but creepier as it goes through an alley with some bushes, so I told my boyfriend to go the long way, which really is like a 2-minute difference, but it's more lit up and beside a road, and I also figured the guy would probably go the short way, but he didn't. He was right behind us, and my boyfriend lives in a tiny little farmer village, so there was no one around even though we were on the main street, and I was getting really scared and constantly checking behind me to see how close he was getting, but the guy just didn't seem to be fazed by my reaction, and surely a normal guy would notice if someone was scared and back up a bit. I don't know. My boyfriend was trying to calm me down and reassure me that he was probably going the same way, and I guess he is probably right, and I do tend to be overly anxious, but he stayed behind us until we were about 5 minutes from our destination, where he turned in. The unsettling part is that the place he turned in is a little set of flats that houses convicted offenders after prison. This happened years ago when I was barely 14. My middle school and middle school best friend at a time organized a trip abroad to Great Britain, London to be exact. It's supposed to be a few days looking at London attractions, museums, and shops. It was fun, until it wasn't. For the day before we're supposed to leave and go home, we were brought to the streets with some interesting shops. From there we could see Golden Freddy. We received free time for shopping. Our teachers and guide had a brilliant idea. They told us after the time for shopping ends, we have to meet at a different street than this. In retrospect, it was like 100 meters away, but they still should do that. Most of us have never been in London. We are barely speaking English. We don't have a map of the city. Roaming services don't work correctly. 90% of students got lost. I got lost with my best friend because we went in a complete opposite direction. We were both confused about the directions we were given. We were walking along some pavement, and my friend was running ahead or staying behind to nervously look around. We didn't look like we were together because we were not interacting with each other. I guess that's why this next thing happened. My friend ran ahead and stopped to look around when I saw a black car approach me and match my speed. It was broad daylight, there were a lot of people around and no one reacted. I was confused, I didn't know what was happening. Then from the car stepped out a man and said, "You are nice, come with me," and then tried to grab me. The car was still running, so I suppose someone was still in it. I was stunned, I couldn't believe this was real. At that moment my friend ran behind me and grabbed me and dragged me away. We ran and tried to lose tail if a man or a car followed us. After some time we stopped and my friend nervously cried. She asked why I didn't move when the man tried to catch me. I explained my deer in headlights moment. We cooled down and managed to ask some people for help, and we were found by our teachers. We didn't tell anyone there what happened. We were sure no one would believe us. After that, when we got back I told my parents and I never went on a trip organized by my school ever again. My mom considered all of that really unprofessional and irresponsible. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were no clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. Through squinted eyes, I could make out it was a 9 or something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one that was in a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God they did. They gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they had started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuts and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking into the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. Whoever it was in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly, and when I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the last noise I heard after they stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn all over the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pin tube which the police said people often use to smoke meth with, so they think they had been watching my house for a while. I realized that they must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with my family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I lived there another 3 years without incident. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January this year, we got in a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't remember what it was by now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, or call, or anything the whole next day. So this afternoon I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday and I'm pretty sure his last class finished at 1 PM on Tuesdays, meaning he'd surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 PM I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, hey, how's it going conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working. But I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of all of it, I might have noticed it was strange how slow the footsteps were or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight and didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting, and waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, we've been fighting for 24 hours, huh, smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom? His sister? The landlady? For some reason, I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister. So I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized, his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into my bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There was a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up and I asked him if his mom or sister might have come over unannounced. He told me, no, don't move, I'm calling the police. The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird though. Nothing was missing from the apartment despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight in the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change her locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day, and I hope I never do. Okay, this happened in 2016 when I was a 17-year-old first-year college student in film school. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. I never felt unsafe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code only the people who lived there knew, and my door had 3 different locks and it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad had ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been very careful with locking the door when I leave my home. I always check it twice. So this one time, I leave to go to class and lock my door, but for some reason I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck, so I went to get the caretaker of the building to help me, but he wasn't there and I was getting late for class, so I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first so it's not too noticeable. When I got home, the caretaker was back, so he came to help me, and we couldn't get it out for 15 minutes until somehow he did. He told me the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only locked it once instead of twice. I just said okay and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Flash forward to 2 months later, I was taking out the trash one night around 11 PM. While on the phone with my sister, I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash. Then I would take a shower afterwards before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always locked the door, even just to take out the trash. Because of my lock being damaged, I only locked it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went to the apartment and locked the door immediately, with 3 different types of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is just 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I left the bathroom door slightly open, enough so I could see a man in my shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible. except my main lock was damaged from 2 months earlier and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as fast as possible. I jumped out the window without really thinking. I figured it was the only solution, except I live on the second floor, so I completely smashed my ankles in the landing. I started running in whichever way I could, and when I got a little bit further from the building, I looked back and a man was there, at my window, watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of the height and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further and called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I live close to the station. They pushed my door open and the man was there just sitting on my couch, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back, like he didn't think I would call the police. They arrested the guy and later told me he had already been arrested for attempted kidnapping and attempted murder. They also told me how everything had happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so he got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He then heard me telling my sister I was going to take a shower, which was why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. He crocheted my lock while I was taking out the trash. He apparently noticed me on my school campus and followed me to my home several times before succeeding to actually come in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I had recently changed my phone and the previous one was still on the table, so he thought I didn't have a phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building, we all needed identification proving we lived there. Building IDs were created and we had to scan them every time, and it was the only way to go inside the building. Nothing really bad happened in the neighborhood after that. It's back to being very peaceful and friendly. A friend and I played after-school hockey. It wasn't a popular sport, so our games took place at another school, which was incredibly far away and pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The area didn't have any train stations, so we relied on 3 different buses to get there, and again to get home. The games usually took place pretty late and ended around 7 to 8 p.m. when it was dark. All the other girls in our team got picked up by their parents, but we always busted together home. We didn't feel it was dangerous because there were 2 of us and being classic 12-year-olds, we thought we were mature enough to be independent. Because we had to change buses 3 times, and we lived so far away, by the time we got to our second bus stop it was usually pitch black. The second bus stop was desolate, far off from the school, in front of some kind of abandoned building, and basically a bit creepy. The stop was small and wasn't sheltered, it was just a steel pole with a bus painted on the sign. On this particular night, it wasn't raining as well, so we felt extra miserable standing out in the cold. The buses in my area are also notoriously unreliable, so it wasn't unusual for us to wait an hour at this bus stop. That night it definitely felt like we had been waiting there for over an hour when a car pulled up in front of us. A woman was in it. She rolled down her window and asked us where we were going. I told her the suburb we lived in, which was an hour drive away, and she said she could give us a lift if we wanted. If it had been a man, I would have immediately been suspicious and liked it. But because she was a youngish woman, looked about 40, it didn't raise any red flags in my mind. I remember thinking that she must be understandably worried about 2 young girls standing out in the rain at night. I smiled and thanked her and said it was okay and we would wait for the bus. She hesitated and then drove away. But a few minutes later, she came back and pulled up in front of us again. She told us her daughter wasn't at a play and that she was going there anyway to pick her up, so are we sure we didn't want a lift? My friend was almost about to get in, but I hesitated. Maybe thanks to my parents drilling me about stranger danger, and I said thank you, but it was alright, we'll wait. She was a bit pushier this time and asked us if we were sure quite a few times and mentioned her daughter again, but eventually she drove away. At this point, I think my intuition was telling me that it felt a bit weird that she hadn't mentioned her daughter earlier. Another few minutes later, she came back again. This time she said that she had just driven past our bus further down the road and then it obviously skipped our stop, so she offered to give us a lift to try to catch up to it. This sounded unlikely to me. By this point, I was super suspicious. I didn't really have any time to think, so it was just a bad gut feeling, rather than any logical reasoning. With all the politeness and smiles gone, I straight up just said no. I could tell my friend, who was about to get into her car before, was also starting to feel weird about it because she backed away from the road. The woman hesitated for a while. It lapsed into an awkward silence and I remember she just kept glancing at her back seat. I remember holding my hockey stick tight and playing in my brain how I was going to defend myself. It honestly felt like forever before she finally drove away. A few minutes later the bus came and I had never been so relieved in my life. By this point, we were absolutely soaked. To this day, I still don't know whether she was just worried, a good Samaritan, or a potential kidnapper. I flip between the two and honestly I can't decide. My friend also thinks it's a mystery, but we don't know if we were just being paranoid. This was around 2015 and I was living in Seattle. I worked in an office that allowed me to bring my dog to work. A 100-pound German Shepherd. He's a big sweetheart but looks quite scary to strangers. After work one day, I got on the bus home, which was around a 45-minute ride. I noticed someone stared at me and didn't think much of it. While it's unsettling to be watched, I've had my fair share of odd conversations on the bus, and it wasn't out of the ordinary to encounter such weird behavior. I honestly don't remember too much about his appearance, but I do remember thinking he looked fairly normal and didn't seem high or drunk. My bus stop was on a busy street in a bit of a sketchier part of town, but it's not frequently trafficked. When we reached the stop, my dog and I set off on the short trek home, only a few blocks away. As I exited the bus, I noticed the man who had been watching me had exited too. Something was off about him. He seemed intent on keeping stride with me, trailing closely behind. I've heard advice somewhere in the past that you shouldn't go straight home if you're being followed. I'm sure that's situation specific and sometimes it's safer to be in your home, but nothing had happened besides having my personal space invaded and didn't feel immediately unsafe. So I opted not to lead this stranger straight to my door. I knew that my partner at the time wasn't at home, so I decided the best plan was to weave through my neighborhood for several blocks to try to lose him. I think a part of me was also wanting to be sure I was being followed at all, or if this person just happened to be walking in the same direction. After several blocks, it became clear he was following me. I was weaving around erratically and he was walking the same path. Neither of us spoke to one another and I was becoming more and more frustrated that anyone would follow a woman home. The streets were quiet and I couldn't see anybody around who I could signal to for help. I don't think I would have been so surprised this was happening if I was alone and without my dog. I can't imagine anyone in their right mind following someone with a large German Shepherd. I started walking faster when I rounded a corner and quickly ducked into a hallway hugging a duplex a block from my house. I was hoping the pathway would wrap around the house completely so I could get out of the line of sight of this person, but was met with a fence to my face and didn't have time to backtrack. I was ultimately cornered in this nook between a house, a fence, and a hedge. I crouched down with my dog and waited for the guy to pass us. I watched as the man strolled by the walkway, seemingly not noticing us at all. He didn't turn his head or even gaze in our direction. I decided that we'd stay there for a few minutes just to make sure he was gone. About 3 minutes went by. Just as I was thinking it was safe to head home, the man stepped into my line of sight. He didn't make eye contact with me, just as he hadn't the first time he walked by. He was moving calmly and deliberately, and slowly came to a stop as soon as he was right in front of me, just off the curb. He was about 2 yards away, facing me, and not directly looking, with just a sidewalk and a grassy strip between us. I watched him as he started to unload his pockets. He had a number of metal objects he was taking out, placing them in a line. To this day, I'm not sure what they were, but I'm glad I didn't find out. At this point, I called 911 and told them what was happening, that someone was following me and showing erratic behavior. The cops made it there quickly, and as soon as they pulled up, the dispatcher advised me to get out of there. I hightailed it out of my hiding spot and took a non-direct path home since my house was technically in the line of sight of where I was crouched. I don't know what ended up happening with him, but fortunately never saw him again, and I don't know if he had malicious intent. This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple video games, and stayed up way too late. It was about 2 AM I think when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Luckily at the time we were in his kitchen at the back of the house, so no one could see us. We were spooked because there couldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured it was just some drunk person and they'd go away soon enough. After 30 seconds, there was more banging on the door and yelling that neither of us could understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we both were scared. He texted his mom, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had just left a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go to her friends' houses in the middle of the night, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. We didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based off past experiences with cops in our small town being not the best. At this point, we turned off the kitchen light and we were ducked down on the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anyone we knew. I army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There was also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room though, so I was very careful not to be seen. I couldn't see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and had gray hair. I crawled back to Jay and we quietly decided what to do. We heard the knocking stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided to go around the table in the dining room in case he tried to come around back, which is where the kitchen was. After around 10 minutes of silence, we rock paper scissors for who had to check if he was there, and of course I lost, so I again army crawled to the dining room door. I saw the man staring through the window, hands cupped up against the glass. I made eye contact with him, and the moment he saw me, and I loudly said, causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone, and he told me later he was texting his mom to come home and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time we could make out a bit more of what he said. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm gonna kill you," in there a couple times. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbors seemed to notice him, but no luck. I crawled back out of his sight and again discussed what to do with my friend. We decided to go into the basement for safety, which you could get to by moving the fridge. Confusing house, I know, but but it was really old and not meant for modern-sized appliances. We pull out the fridge and get into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still terrified. I start having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together best I can for Jay, who is also on the verge of a panic attack. We hear a gunshot and shattering glass from above us, and I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I look at each other, terrified. We hear loud footsteps and yelling above us, the man asking where we went. We hear him going upstairs and run around up there for a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over our furniture, I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Jay's mom pulls into the driveway, which scares the guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and run to greet his mom, never happier to see her. She was shocked by the state of the house and hugged us, happy that we were safe and scared by how close we were to being hurt. We were all scared after that. After that night, they had better security installed, and we went over safety protocol if anything ever happened again. Luckily, it hasn't happened again yet, and I hope it never will. I work at a convenience store. I've had some creepy customers come in before, but this one was a little more disturbing. If it weren't for what had been said and done, I don't think this would have been that bad. I normally work third shift, which is around 4 p.m. to around 12 a.m., and I'm by myself for the last 4 hours of my shift. This man had come in earlier that day and was acting odd, jittery, chewing at his lip constantly, fumbling with his debit card, to the point I did everything for him except putting the pin in. Fast forward to around 10:30 p.m. I'm sweeping the floors as I'm supposed to do every night when the man entered. He approached my register and I asked him what he needed. "Hey, can I have one of those lighters?" I pick one up and go to scan it, but he tells me that he doesn't have any money. I tell him he can't have it, and he glares at me before leaving. A man was in line behind him, and the entire time I was scanning his things, the lighter guy was staring at me through the window right next to my register. He eventually walks off, and the man jokes about the creepy guy asking for a lighter when the man in line didn't even have his with him. He tells me to be safe, then walks out to the gas station pumps. I start sweeping again, but when I turn around to move a small crate out of the way, the creepy guy is staring at me again, just watching me work. I quickly make my way to the back room to make mop water so I could get away from him for a second. He stayed there for a solid 5 minutes before stalking off again. I grabbed a random receipt as a cover and basically bolted to the man at the gas pumps. I got close and asked if he was in a hurry to go anywhere. I told him that the creepy lighter guy was still hanging around and that it was really freaking me out. He promises me that he didn't plan on actually leaving after getting gas. At this point, I thought it wouldn't take up too much of his time, since we both thought the man was already wandering away from the store. Unfortunately, he went back toward the store a few seconds later. Soon, an older woman comes in and I warn her about the creepy guy. She asked what I was talking about and I subtly nod in his direction. Mind you, still hanging around my window. She looks a little disturbed, leaning in and whispering, "What does he want?" I explained that he wanted a lighter, but he didn't have any money so I didn't give him one. I told her to be careful and she quickly told me to worry more about myself since I was at the store alone. She left, and I saw the creepy guy approach the window again. Thankfully, he didn't look in, just hung around it like he was waiting for someone. After a while, a daughter of a family friend comes in with her girlfriend, and we quietly make small talk. Like the last woman, I warned them that the lighter guy was still roaming around and he could be dangerous. Before they get to tell me anything, a woman was talking with the guy from the gas pumps, spotted them while scanning family friend's items, and hurried in and told me to call the cops. Obviously, not familiar with the area I worked in and hearing 3 different people telling me what numbers to call, I was shaking and in near tears. My family friend said she would call while I calmed down. Another girl had run out at this point, and I don't blame her. Family friend's girlfriend told me that lighter guy threatened to throw rocks through the window and hurt/rob me. After about 3 minutes of pacing and trying not to cry, I saw my mom's truck pull in. I bolted to her, telling her what was going on. She calmed down and walked me back to the entrance. As this happened, creepy guy had climbed the hill and crossed the street to Bojangles and sat near the front door. The cops arrived. The man from the pumps gave his statement, I gave mine. And finally family friend gave hers, which included the threats. From what was said, he was about to break into my car. The man that stayed with me stopped him, but that didn't stop the creep from roaming still. After we talked to the cops, they sped to Bojangles and confronted the lighter guy. After arguing, a quick pat down and more arguing, the man was put in the back of the cop car. Lighter guy, I knew you were probably on something, but please, let's not meet ever again. To set this story, I bike 5 miles one day, 5 days a week to my job, and I've been for 8 months. I honestly love it. It forces me to get exercise and it's cheap transportation. I take the main road with a lot of traffic, so I've never felt unsafe. I also only ride on the sidewalk since it's safer. One day, coming home, I was passing by an area with a lot of construction going on. To give you a better visual, I ride on the sidewalk along a busy road. As I'm biking, I see a man in a black pickup truck parked as if he's about to pull out of the area, but he's waiting for a spot to open in traffic. He then sees me and reverses to let me by. I remember thinking, oh great, he's letting me by, and I wouldn't have to ride around behind his car to get to the other side. But as I'm getting closer, he does a stop motion with his hand, and he's wearing a safety vest, so I assume he works there and there might be a problem up ahead, like a pothole, etc., so I stop. He spoke with authority like as if he's an officer stopping me or something, and asked if I bike for transport or leisure. I was a little confused since that's a weird question, but I tell him for transport. I bike to my job. He then says, do you bike for leisure? I'm asking because I bought a bike and I'm looking for a riding buddy. I'm not freaking out or anything. I feel a little calm since there are a bunch of cars passing by us, so we're not secluded, but I don't know this man. He's a complete stranger and I was under the impression he worked there and was stopping me for something important. I tell him not really because I'm too tired on my days off and use them to get errands and stuff done. He says, oh I get it. Well there's a bike marathon happening soon if you want to go with me. I'm Shane by the way. What's your name? I tell him my name and say, oh I don't know, I might be busy then. I'm a little awkward in social situations with people I don't know, and this whole interaction was just off, so I don't really know what to say. He changes the subject and starts looking at my bike. He points at it and asks if it's a hybrid. I say yes, and he says can I see it? And starts getting out of his car. This is where it starts getting weird. He tells me he's seen me riding before and I thought I was cute. He's also looking at my bike and commenting on it and saying stuff like, oh that's nice, it's aluminum, and I'm just feeling weird on the inside. I'm also sitting on my bike ready to get the f out of there. He then asks if I have a boyfriend and I tell him yes I do. He lets out a big groan and says, oh man really? Because if we go biking together it would be kind of a date thing. I tell him yeah sorry and he goes, are you sure? Are you ready to kick him to the curb or what? I just want to get out of here at this point, but he parked his car literally in front of the sidewalk, so it wouldn't be that easy to speed by him. He seemed upset and kept asking if I'm sure I have one and how long we've been together. I said, a couple years. Well, I'm crunched for time and have to go, bye, and sped off. After that, I had a mini vacation and was off for 5 days after that, but now I'm back to riding to work again and I haven't seen him since. This probably happened maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. So creepy older man who tricked me and blocked me on my bike, let's not ever meet again. This was back in 2014. I had moved off campus and into a really nice part of town. I was a junior in college and this was my first time living on my own. Campus was only 2 miles away, so I would often walk back home from campus. I would take the bus or catch a ride with a friend to campus. I walked home because my schedule ending never quite matched up with the bus schedule and my friend finished 2 hours before my daily schedule did. I was used to walking the 2 miles to my apartment. I never thought anything of it because I walked through the busy area of my town, along the second main road. So there were always people around. My apartment was actually a stone throw from the most popular frozen custard shop in the area. Every night the parking lot would be packed. So I'm walking home like usual. I get to the frozen custard shop and notice there's a lot of people tonight. It was just something I always noticed and paid attention to. All of a sudden this huge red truck pulls up beside me. I'm caught off guard because I have headphones in. It takes about 30 minutes to an hour to walk home, so I'm normally listening to music or talking on the phone. I stop and take my headphones out and look at the truck. This man dressed like a country singer was sitting in the driver's seat. He looks at me and asks where the mall is. I put him in the direction to the mall. He said, I've been down that way. I'm a photographer and I'm supposed to be doing a photo shoot at a bar behind the mall. I've lived in this town going on 3 years now. I know where all the bars are located. Makes it easy when all of them are on the same street. I explained to him, there's no bars by the mall. They're all on Philly Street. He continued to insist on a bar being behind the mall. All of a sudden he just changes. He looked at me and asked me to step back, so I did. He looked me over and asked how tall I was. I told him 5'7". He then asked me, I'm doing that photo shoot, would you like to be a model for it? I told him I don't like getting my photos taken. He insisted, telling me I was beautiful and would look great. Almost like he's given up on the tactic, he moves to another. He then asked me where I live. I told him not far. He wanted more info. I pointed in the vague vicinity of my apartment, making a point not to actually point at it. This dude then asked me if I wanted a ride. I told him no, it's not far, I'll be fine. He kept insisting I let him give me a ride home. I kept telling him no, stepping farther away from his truck. He then out of nowhere asked me how he could get to the mall. I told him, go down this road, at the light turn left. The mall will be on your left. He thanked me and started to drive off. I walked slowly to my apartment. I watched his truck get to the light. Instead of turning left like I said, he went straight. Going straight leads into a small residential area that you need to know this town well to get through. I lived in that town from 2012 to 2017 and still can't figure my way through that area. I made sure that truck was completely out of sight before I hightailed it to my apartment and locked the door. My dog didn't quite understand what was going on. All he really knew was he had to go to the bathroom pretty bad. I tried to distract him for 5 or 10 minutes to make sure the coast was clear. My heart sunk when I did finally take him out. The same red truck was parked near the parking lot behind my apartment building. The truck didn't belong there. I'm one that memorizes all the vehicles that are normal for the area. No one had a red truck like that. I went back in and texted people describing the man and the truck to them in case something happened to me. I did not go back out for hours. When I did, the truck was gone. I never saw the man or the truck ever again. To the man who probably tried to abduct me in front of the most popular venue in town on my way home, I hope I never see you again. Okay, before I get into the story, there's a few things I need to explain about my country, South Africa, for you to fully understand the story. In South Africa, it's normal to have high brick walls with electric gates, electric fences, alarms, etc. The crime here is hectic. It's also pretty normal to have big gardens. My family and I are big animal lovers, so at the time we had 6 dogs. 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short hair pointers, and 2 Dachshunds. With that being said, our dogs roam freely in and out of the garden, as it's obviously enclosed. We usually leave the veranda door open during the day for them to do their thing. Another thing about South Africa, it's normal to have a live-in domestic worker, maid, and gardener. Like, the average family usually employs them. It's not only for wealthy people, which seems to be a thing in other countries. For the story, our DW is Ellie, and our gardener is Vince. So, this happened in 2007 when I was just 9 years old. My older brother, who was 10, and I had just gotten our first cell phones that day. My dad surprising us after work. You may think it's a bit young, but it was used for emergencies or to communicate with our parents. Anyways, it's an important piece of info for the story. We don't usually leave our veranda door open at night, due to security reasons, but I remember it being a hot summer night that night. So of course, this night of all nights, the veranda door was wide open and the dogs were doing their thing in the garden. My brother and I were in my parents' room setting up our new cell phones, all excited. Ellie's daughter Anne, who's like an older sister to us, 18 years old, was helping my brother and I. My dad was somewhere in the house and my mom was in the bath. I specifically remember Anne having a comment about how the dogs would not shut up and how annoying it was. That's when I noticed it too. Sure, they'd bark, but it was usually the Dachshunds that yapped, when the bigger dogs just chilled. Plus, it would only happen for a few minutes, then they'd get over it. Something was different that night, as even the bigger dogs were barking non-stop. My dad appeared in his room and mentioned to us that he too noticed the dog's incessant barking. He was going to check if everything was okay. No alarm bells went off in my head, and I don't believe my dad thought anything was amiss either, because my brother asked to investigate with them and my dad agreed. I was obviously too engrossed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad ventured out to our garden with my brother in tow when my dad had noticed the dogs were all grouped, growling and going nuts at a dark corner behind our in-the-ground swimming pool. The best way I can describe it is that our garden beyond our pool hits like a slight decline, so we have a few steps leading down the hill to the bottom end of our garden. We usually have a lamp that lights it up, but my dad had noticed how the lamp seemed to be off, which confused him because he could have sworn it worked the other night. Either way, my dad said he got this gut-wrenching feeling because of this and because of how out of the character the dogs were acting. He called after them. They'd usually come running, but tonight they all just seemed to look at him, then turn back around and continue to go crazy at this dark corner down the steps. My dad told my brother to go back inside the house and get a torch, sort of using it as an excuse for my brother to not come out with him because of this off feeling. When my brother went back inside, my dad slowly approached the steps. He noticed how the dog seemed to be snapping at whatever it was, hiding just out in the view in the darkness. As he got to the steps, he noticed the lamp was smashed. Confused, he inched the steps, and as he put 2 and 2 together, it was too late. My dad, being an ex-vet and an avid hunter, felt something cold against his temple and immediately knew it was a gun. Out of the darkness stepped 4 of the men in balaclavas, all armed. Shocked, he stood frozen on the steps. The man holding the gun to his head was instantly aggressive and asked him where my brother was. That he saw my dad come out with my brother, but my brother went back into the house. My dad said something came over him. Before he knew what he was saying, he responded with, "He's gone inside to press the panic button." As he said it, he saw how all these guys started to panic. They started speaking in an African language called Zulu. Assuming my dad couldn't understand, it's not common for white people to speak it, but my dad had actually grown up on a farm where he learned it fluently because of the farm workers. The aggressive guy holding the gun said, in Zulu, "The cops will be here any minute. Let's just kill this, grab what we can, and go." The others seemed apprehensive, and a smaller guy seemed really on edge. They continued to say how he can't go back to jail again, and they need to get the out of there before the cops show, which would be any minute. He was panicking. My dad then fed on this guy's fear. My dad then interrupted them, speaking English, pretending to not understand what they were saying, and said that we usually have armed response vehicles that drove in our area, and since my brother pushed the panic button so long ago, they'll probably be here any second. And that did it. My dad watched as their plan unraveled before them. The smaller scared guy started freaking out all the other guys, saying that they need to leave ASAP or else they'd get caught. He seemed to make the others more nervous and lose confidence until they started full-on bickering amongst themselves, their plan slowly turning to as a third guy had put it. The aggressive one pointing the gun to my dad's head slowly lowered it as they started fighting, losing focus on my dad and shifting his focus onto his crew. My dad then used this as an opportunity to slowly back up the steps and turn to dart to the house. As luck would have it, as my dad ran into the veranda door, my oblivious brother was heading out with a torch. My dad scooped him up under his arm mid-ran and sprinted into the house, not even closing the door behind him. Silly, I know, but I think he just wanted to get my brother inside as quick as possible without even thinking. Anne and I were obviously also oblivious to everything. When my dad rushed to the bedroom door, slammed it shut and told us to go upstairs into the attic, quote unquote, "There's 5 guys outside with guns. They're here to hurt us. Get upstairs now." My heart sank. I remember my body automatically responding and me sprinting to the stairs with Anne right behind. My mom ran out of the bathroom in a towel, not too far behind. We sat there in darkness and silence. I swore you could hear a pin drop. I think we were all just wanting to hear something below us in the rooms. My mom cursed saying she didn't have a phone, neither did my dad. But ha, in my hand was my brand new Sony Ericsson. No better emergency to use it than now, right? My mom dials the police and I kid you not, they asked where we live, we explained and they told us it wasn't in their jurisdiction. Sorry, click, the line goes dead. We're now not only ourselves, but we're flabbergasted too. My mom starts cursing like a sailor again and that's when my dad realizes. He didn't close the veranda door and what about Ellie and Vince, who are in their rooms, blissfully unaware of the danger they're in. He gets his firearm in the safe in the attic and tells us whatever we hear, do not come downstairs. To stay hidden no matter what. Now I'm sobbing, begging my dad to not leave us, but he tells us he has to go get Eli and Vince before something bad happens to them. Now there's even more tears, as reality hits that there's 2 other people still in danger. Anne's understandably in hysterics because she's also fearing for her mom downstairs. My dad disappears and the air is thick with tension. We can still hear the dogs going crazy, indicating that those men were still on our property. My mom then calls another number, the armed security that drives around the area, and they say they'll be over in about 10 to 15 minutes. They say to wait and stay hidden until they ring our bell at the gate. We all wait in silence, fearing that we'll hear a gunshot or anything indicating these men are in our house. But there was just silence. The only sound was the dog's barks outside. After what seemed like hours, most likely a couple minutes, we heard stomping coming up from the stairs and my heart rate quickened. I remember shutting my eyes and praying that it was just my dad with Ellie and Vince. Luckily, it was. We all hid for a while, no one dared to speak. The dog seemed to have calmed down considerably, but we were still barking every now and then. The gate intercom rang, and my dad told us to wait while he checked if it was just the security company, and sure enough, it was. He opened up and the nightmare was over. I remember standing up and my knees buckling from the adrenaline my body endured. The armed security somehow notified the right police, and everyone investigated the garden. They found that there was actually 7 pairs of footprints and that these guys bent the spikes on our wall and just climbed over. We got an electric fence shortly after, so there must have been 2 other guys hiding in the shadows that my dad hadn't seen, which is actually creepy in its own right. Thank goodness nothing happened to my family, and I'm forever thankful for my dad's quick thinking regarding the panic button. Also, I'm so glad my dad understands Zulu and can manipulate the situation to benefit us. This takes place in the early 80s. I grew up in the suburbs in a very friendly townhouse complex. We all knew our neighbors. My first friends were the kids that lived in other townhouses. To describe my home, all townhomes are attached. They're also very tall and slender. I had 6 flights of stairs to go from the basement to the bedrooms on the top floor. We had a tiny driveway, and then there was the small roadway. On the other side was a raised flower bed that ran the length of the side of the townhouse wall across the street. The most important thing was a very bright street light in the middle of the planter. It shined ominously right into our front windows at night, and it had enough light to illuminate shapes above the kitchen counter on the 3rd floor kitchen, just the top part of bodies. You didn't need to turn on the kitchen lights at night if you needed to get something. One night I had a sleepover with my friend who lived diagonal to me. Us scouts had stayed up late and went to the kitchen for snacks. I peered out into the street to see an unfamiliar guy walking by on the roadway. There was no sidewalks. I noted to my pal that there was a weirdo walking by because he didn't seem right. He was tall and lanky with long 80s hair. With our familiarity with people in the neighborhood, we didn't recognize him. Our complex roadway did lead to a street, but it wasn't used as a shortcut because it was a long way to get around the neighborhood, so you didn't see others often, especially at night. As soon as I commented weirdo, he walked by our house. Only a couple of minutes later, he walked by again, going in the direction he came on the roadway. This time, we saw him out of the corners of our eyes coming along. Being scared kids, we immediately ducked as we were visible to the street. Up until then, we didn't think anything more of it, but our instincts told us to hide, so we did. My friends said we were overreacting after a few minutes being crouched down, so we carefully peered over the counter. Weirdo hadn't walked by. He was now standing in front of the flower planter looking up at our house. To this day, I remember that bright streetlight illuminating him from behind very ominously. He He looked like a horror film killer come to life. We hit the floor again, thoroughly freaked out. I don't know how long we were there for. I could only hear the sound of our breathing for some time, until I thought I heard the squeak of the garage door handle. It was one of those old rusty ones that opened outward. I thought I was dreaming until I heard for the second time that rusty handle squeak. He was trying to get in now. My friend and I were frozen in fear. Luckily, my dad always locked the garage. The squeaking stopped. Even though my friend and I could have run upstairs or shut it to my parents, we were rooted on the spot, thinking if we moved he'd get us somehow. We thought that was it as it was suddenly quiet. But a few minutes later I heard the swoosh of the screen door and telltale sound of the front door handle being pressed down. The first screen door was never locked, but thank God the wooden door always was. The noise repeated a few times. The metal scratching of the screen door hinge and the click of the front door latch. I wanted to piss my pants and my friend looked like crying. Again, we were too silly enough to move or do anything to help ourselves. We just shook in terror and hoped he'd go away. He stopped trying to get in after about 5 minutes, and all we heard after that was silence. About 8 minutes later on the kitchen floor, we moved to stand up. I thought we were still pretty crouched down and invisible. That wasn't the case. This time we heard a clear voice. The other kitchen window near the pantry had its screen window open. "Hey, I'm thirsty. Can I get a glass of water?" My friend and I stared at each other in disbelief. He was still there. We didn't move, but someone had to eventually. My friend, being the braver one, decided to peek out the screen window while trying not to be seen. He must have heard her. "I know you're there. Come on and let me in. I won't hurt you." This was the moment we decided to flee up those 2 flights of stairs to my bedroom. I always had an active imagination like most kids. I really hated that my bedroom was the very first one at the top of my stairs. My parents were at the back. Therefore, in mind, I would be the first one to be murdered if someone broke in, and that fear was certainly tenfold that very night. My friend and I hunkered down on my bed, deep under the covers, shaking. We did not sleep at all, waiting for the click of a door or worse. We thought we heard him try again, but at that point we weren't sure if we were hearing things. Until the day I moved out, I never really felt totally comfortable in my bedroom ever again. I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Chautauqua County, New York. Everyone knew everyone here. If you thought you would get away with something, then be prepared to have your ear chewed off by the time you get home. There was this one day though, it was a cold winter day and school unfortunately was still open, so all the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house as I was used to walking with my older sister to school since she knew the routes better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking a different route every day from school, but after that day, I learned that was what saved my life. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mom came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister was too sick to go today. Being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I was almost 12 years old and all my friends' parents let them walk alone. She looked at me for a long while, then told me to make sure I pay attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. I hurriedly nodded and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early, but seeing as it was just me, I thought it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play in the brown slush that was on the left side of the road, and even made funny looking snowballs to see how far I could throw them. Halfway to school I noticed a white van following behind me. Being the playful child I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself I was being stupid, but continued more hurriedly to school. Once I got to school, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the van a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I was on school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that would be the end of it, but throughout the day when I would stare out the window, the van would be there. I assumed that it never really left, just parked. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew it was. The van had a bright yellow smile emoji sticker on it. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass, I knew they could see me. It was now the end of the day and I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mom, because she was at work and my sister was home sick. I had to suck it up and start walking home. I tried to blend in with the group of kids, but most of them were car riders, and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another route home. I didn't memorize this route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by that van. I made it to my main street, but realized my mistake too late. The route I took led back to the main street where I walked to school. Hidden behind a row of cars was the white van with the smiley emoji sticker. I tried to stay calm and walk past in, but once I heard the van door slightly click open, I ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy footfalls behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly inside of my house and forced myself into the thick snow to make it to the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it to the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look at my face and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there until my brother got home. Me and my sister don't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was to me going missing. Whoever you are that attempted to kidnap me and do God knows what else, let's not ever meet again. When I was 20 years old, so 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss is not the nicest of people and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, albeit temporarily, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of this shift, I went by without any issues, until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punched it in on my GPS, and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrive and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and mostly littered with modern townhouses, but the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something's about to go down, but thankfully a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s. He was pretty tall, maybe a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny. I tell him his pizza's here and he just stands there staring at me. I asked him if he was okay and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago and I'm just zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money. I hand him the pizza, and as I'm making change he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that?" Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said goodnight and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I get a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door very excitedly and says, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and I can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well," as he was pulling out his wallet. As he's counting his money, he asked me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly told him my name. As I'm making change, he asked if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is I looked way younger than I was at that time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently as he wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay, I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night, and walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway, staring at me, until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy, and even brought it up to my coworkers, and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the shift. A week later, as I'm working the night shift, we get an order from the same guy again, and this is when it finally hits the fan. I arrive at the house at around 10:30 p.m. and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in the house was on. I get out of my car and I walk to the front door with the pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time, he was wearing a suit and I jumped back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out on the window and I figured if I just opened the door now, so you wouldn't have to ring the bell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in the house, so he was sitting in the dark this whole time. And if so, why? I nervously laugh and say, "It's okay." He asked me if I liked his suit, which I said yes. He then asked me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me and says, "There's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. You should really go on a date with me." He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms hard. I'm officially sweating bullets at this point and now trying to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, "Dude, please. I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've ever seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care. Get inside now. We're gonna have a good time." He He starts trying to pull me to the house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presumed was a knife. I did something to this day that I'm still thankful worked as he was doing that. I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in the stomach. This stuns me for a few seconds, and as he loosened his grip on me, allowed me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm and just starts yelling. I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it, and luckily it hits his head and he lets me go. I slam on the door, and then all of a sudden he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging at my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of the spot and quickly reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my hood screaming, "Stop the car!" I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily, he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get away from him as far as I could. In my panicked state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and I slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was just sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that just happened. My coworker comforted me, and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrived at the store, and I gave them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself, as well as scratches on my car for the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home, and I collapsed on my bed, and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day, and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as the psycho goes, 2 days later I received an update from the police. The entire duplex is owned by the guy's brother, who lived on the right side with his wife, and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly at first for robberies and assaults. He had been released from jail about 5 months ago apparently. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone and his family had no idea where he ran off to, but the police insisted they would find him, and indeed they did, albeit not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind, but the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently, he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street. Luckily, somebody happened to be looking out the window at the right time, called the cops, and the police caught him by trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thank the officers for everything they did and for informing me, so I walked out of the station. I walked down the street and I light up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything that I'd just been told. I don't wish death on people, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I wouldn't have to ever encounter him again, and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time when we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending that we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a "Stand By Me." This was based on the movie on the same name that just came out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and to camp little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to, we fished, we hid from trains. At night, we camped in woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we would see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We would do stuff with family in the day, and at night, we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a heck of a mix. Soon, we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came, we started out early morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, and so I gave it a screw it, and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit just to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from up top of the short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be any clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet, no movement could be seen, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it and it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot that we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up just to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and just talked, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. Do you hear that? What is that? It sounds like people singing. And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this?" The light looked to be a candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the crap out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language, because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the heck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't really make them out very well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move toward us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our stuff, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill, and they were moving erratically like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town that was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices and they sure as hell didn't sound like any kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the most creepiest thing that happened to me out in the woods. So, this happened about 5 years ago while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night in a very safe city with very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late, and the mall stores were starting to close, so I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finished up eating at about 10 p.m. to leave out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags in my arms to find my keys, when a 50-ish-year-old looking guy starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot with shaggy gray and white hair and a faded flannel shirt and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "Give me all your money now." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him owlishly and shakingly said, "What?" He then said he was just kidding and came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car, waiting for me to unlock the door to let them in. He then starts making small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if they were being good girls for Santa, how old they were, if we got all of our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things did we get, etc. He didn't seem drunk, high, slow, or anything at all. He was very coherent and seemed sound of mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night. Was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids on the other side of the car, just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside of my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for about a couple minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking and trying to politely keep the situation from escalating by calmly and nonchalantly talking to him while also trying in vain to find my car keys to get us out of there. They were in there hiding good. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or gun or rob me, and my kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car, and I couldn't find my car keys to get my kids into the safety of the car. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out, and she kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment and reaction to the situation. Being that he was only talking and acting friendly, and I was doing my best to stay calm, they were oblivious to the alarming situation we were all in, and being 9 months pregnant, and that I was no match for this full-grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed," and "It was nice meeting you," and telling my girls to say that it was nice meeting him too. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave wasn't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts and asking them what their favorite school subjects are and how nice young ladies they were, etc., while I was struggling with the shopping bags and digging in my giant cluttered purse for my car keys. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay the situation was, because he was being friendly and because of the whole "I'm with mommy, so I'm safe" child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for dad for Christmas, and started enthusiastically talking about kid stuff and asking him if he knew what Minecraft was, etc., and keeping this creep from leaving us alone by keeping him engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them out of there. Then I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my car keys in the mall, and that we were stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking over his shoulders and was showing no signs of walking away, and I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline start to spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops, and I felt like at any moment something was about to go down, as the gravity of realizing that there were no other people or witnesses around, and that they were totally alone with him at that moment, the odds were stacked against us and that he has his chance. He all of a sudden was all like, "Okay, it was nice talking to you, see you later," and walked off in the same direction as which he came. It wasn't until then I found my car keys and locked the car and told my kids to get in fast, and I got in too, and locked the doors and started the car and drove out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the heck would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it was totally acceptable to go out of his way just to approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night just to chit chat? But being that nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked us how shopping went, and I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was and was kinda joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and I started making fun of myself by telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find my car keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm, and I assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was talking and eventually left on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. He decided to go to business school instead of becoming a cop, and being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop from my dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him about the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure the reason why that guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with the kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me to force me to cooperate, knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get into the car with them and then do whatever he wanted me to do, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location to do whatever knows what. And being that he wasn't wearing a mask, suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the backseat passenger door where my 7-year-old was, standing by waiting to get in. My husband then told me that the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took so long for me to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. And that whole time, me trying to search for my car keys in my purse saved me from potentially being abducted. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I recently discovered this sub and immediately thought of this experience that happened to me 2 summers ago while I was cat sitting and house sitting for an older couple I met in a French class I was taking. This couple lived near a busy corner with a bookshop, coffee shop, a grocery store, and a movie theater in a nice neighborhood of a big city. For all these reasons and more, I was pretty excited to house sit there. My own apartment, where I lived with my boyfriend and my own cat, was about a 10-minute drive to 40-minute walk further up the street in a quiet, residential area with nothing much around it. Now, my own cat is vocal and super social. Because of this, we try never to leave him alone at night because he will literally cry for us all night. We're always slightly paranoid that he's going to get us evicted due to noise complaints from neighbors. We lived on the top floor and you could literally hear him crying from the bottom floor and outside if the door to the building is open. So my boyfriend and I decided that he should stay at the apartment with our cat while I was house sitting. My boyfriend drops me off at the house and I settle in with my luggage, look around the surprisingly large 3-story house, and then decide to walk over to the grocery store to pick up some food for the next few days. As I'm walking home with my bag of groceries, I notice this man, extremely tall and gaunt, with a head full of long, shaggy hair, walking parallel across the street watching me. I'm only about 2 houses away from the place where I'm staying, so I sit down on the edge of the wall as though I'm taking a break and call my mom, trying to keep an eye on him surreptitiously from the corner of my eye. This man stops behind a pole across the street and continues to watch me. I tell my mom this guy seems to think that a pole hides him from my view, but that I can see him from there, standing still as a statue, just watching me. I don't want him to know where I'm staying, so we continue chatting, and eventually, I turn my full gaze on the man to let him know that I see him watching me. For a moment he doesn't react at all, then he just sort of meanders on down the small street, and I watch him turn the corner and disappear from my view. I tell my mom and gather my groceries and walk cautiously down the street, keeping an eye out for him as I near the place I'm house sitting and don't see him. I dart in through the back door next to the garage as quickly as I can and breathe a sigh of relief once I'm inside. I tell my mom everything's good, and I put away the groceries and forget about the entire incident. The couple has a beautiful library, so I continually spend the rest of the afternoon and well into the evening just perusing their walls of books and selecting a few to bring upstairs to the guest bedroom on the 3rd floor. I'm playing some music and just enjoying the quiet downtime all to myself. I finally get sleepy, text my boyfriend goodnight, and fall asleep. I wake up shortly thereafter after a terrifyingly realistic dream that this gaunt man has walked into the room, trailing his fingertips along my body. The room is dark, all the window blinds shut, and my body goes completely still. Half positive that it wasn't a dream, and that he had somehow broken in, it was waiting in the shadow. I quietly reach underneath my pillowcase for my phone. I always keep my phone tucked under my pillow, and it's not there. My panic rises, and my mind overreacts. He's here and he's playing a game with me. He took my phone. He's somewhere in the house. I desperately begin to pat around my bed as quietly as possible, searching beneath the other pillow for my phone. Not there. I think, surely he'll hear me if I get out of my bed to look. But I suddenly remember that I left my laptop next to me on the bed and I open it, quickly sending text after text to my boyfriend through iMessage until he wakes up. I tell him I can't find my phone, had a bad dream, and I'm super anxious. With him awake and responding, I get the courage to flip on the lamp and get out of bed. I search around the floor, thinking my phone must have fallen while I was sleeping. Nope, not on the floor. Finally, as I search the bed frantically, I find it atop the covers on the other side of the bed. Weird, but I suppose I must have knocked it across the bed or something. I don't sleep well the rest of the night, hearing noises from across the 3 floors of the creaky stairs and house, thinking anyone could break in through the patio door across from my room. All they'd have to do is get to the balcony, and wake up the next morning exhausted. The next day, I'm sitting in the living room at their piano practicing. I'm an opera singer, and I was mostly excited about this house sitting because I'd get the chance to sing without worrying about apartment neighbors complaining, with the blinds open. There are some kids riding their bikes, neighbors with dogs, the usual. I'm enjoying my afternoon when I notice there's an odd, run-down, dilapidated, dark house nearly diagonal to this one, which doesn't fit in at all with the otherwise nice neighborhood. Gaunt man walks out of it and sits on the porch. My stomach drops. I call my boyfriend and tell him that the creepy guy apparently lives across the street. I shut the blinds facing that way so that he can't see me and retreat to the other side of the house with the kitchen. I spend the rest of the day chilling, convincing myself that I'm overreacting, that everything is fine and I don't need to worry. Nonetheless, come nightfall, the house seems just way too large, with too many entrances, and the bottom floor is so far away that I worry the noise wouldn't carry up to the top floor if someone did break in. Naturally, I cannot sleep at all. I end up retrieving a knife from the kitchen and stashing it under my pillow. Noises keep me up. Creaks, odd sounds. Around 11 p.m., I call my boyfriend and beg him to come stay with me, assuring him that our cat could survive one night without us. He drives over and pulls into the garage. I come unlock the hall door from the garage to let him inside. I still don't sleep well, but at least I get some sleep with him here, feeling a little safer. He gets a little weirded out about the knife under the pillow and tells me to put it back where I got it. I stash it in the bedside drawer, just in case. The next day, I pull it together and tell him he doesn't need to stay. I'm clearly overreacting. Then comes nightfall, and the plethora of odd noises. I decide I can't stay in the guest room at the top floor anymore because I feel like I can't hear anything. I go down to the second floor and try to sleep on the couch in their media room. George of the Jungle's on TV, and I try to fall asleep while watching that. Instead, I get more and more paranoid that I won't be able to hear anything over the movie and end up switching the movie off. I try to fall asleep again. Now I'm sure that I can hear noises from both above and below me. Not the cat who, every night, hid in a tote bag in their bedroom on the second floor and never made a sound except to hiss at me when we crossed each other's paths. I get no sleep, patrolling the entire house all night, finally falling asleep as the night sky tinged gray with dawn. The next day was my birthday, and his little sister was flying up from across the country to spend a week with us. He couldn't stay the night with me anymore because she was still quite young and needed adult supervision, and I insisted that she stay at our place rather than have them come to the house I was at. Fortunately, my best friend had just returned from her trip, and we decided to have a birthday sleepover. I feel a little paranoid, but again, I'm able to get some sleep with someone else there and wake up a little more refreshed. She leaves, and I sit in the kitchen, which faces the street where Gaunt Man first saw me. Gaunt Man is across the street, walking and watching. I duck down against the wall below the window, placing my phone at the gap between the blinds with only the top of my head showing. Gaunt Man gets closer, still watching as I hit record on the video. I get several seconds of him watching the house until he suddenly seems to notice the top of my head or the phone and snaps his own gaze back to the sidewalk below him and walks on. My heart is pounding. Now he knows that I've watched him watching me again. Probably saw the phone recording or taking a photo, and he lives right across the street, where he often sat on his porch for hours smoking with a couple of other men, facing my direction. The next few nights were a blur of me wandering around the house, checking closets and other closed spaces upon returning from going out, placing chairs against entrances so that I'd hear them scrape if they got moved, half sleeping in the media room, double checking windows, exhausted until the couple of hours of sleep I would get when the sky would tinge gray, and I'd felt I'd survived the most dangerous part of the night. My best friend found out I wasn't sleeping at all, and offered to stay with me for the last night. Boyfriend's little sister was still there, so he couldn't. I accepted her offer, feeling foolish and overdramatic, but thankful. We stayed back in the guest room on the top floor, watching Parks and Rec quietly with the subtitles on, so that I could still hear the rest of the house. It was around 1 AM or so when a shrill, piercing siren suddenly echoed throughout the house. My best friend and I sat up in bed, paralyzed for a moment with fear and confusion. "Did they say anything about an alarm?" she asked me. "No," I responded, hesitantly, wondering if I had missed something in the notes they had left. We stared at each other for another long moment. "What should we do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "We should shut the door and lock it, right?" She was the closest to the door. She shut it quickly and locked it. I moved the nightstand in front of it, a pathetic barricade. The siren continued to wail throughout the house. "Should we call the police?" I asked, my heart pounding into my mouth, opening the blinds with my hands and trying to peer through the dark street below. There was a window to the bathroom with the access from the balcony patio. I checked it, just to make sure yet again that it was shut and locked. "We should probably call the police. Or should we?" She had already begun to call the police, telling them that we were house sitting and an alarm had just gone off. We were concerned about a man who had been watching me over the past few days, and we were alone in the house. The police got our address and said that they would arrive soon. Suddenly, the alarm stopped. With the alarm off, we gathered the courage to remove the nightstand from the door and unlock it. I had pepper mace gripped tightly in my hand as we swung the door open, ready to confront whatever was out there. Nothing. No one. I checked the giant glass door a few steps away that led to the balcony patio. Locked. We made our way down the stairs, cautious, quiet. We finally made it down to the bottom floor when there was pounding at the front door. I hurriedly made it over to the door, removing the chair I had placed in front of it as quickly as I could, letting in 2 policemen. They identified themselves to the door. They came inside, asked me a few questions about this man, and then decided it was probably just a harmless homeless man. I didn't tell them that he lived across the street because I thought they'd accuse me of overreacting. Quote unquote, "He was just walking home, not following you or watching you." End quote. They couldn't find a security system, and told us that it was the fire alarm that had gone off, but they couldn't figure out why. After checking the house and finding no one, they left. I emailed the owners the next day to tell them what happened, and that we had called the police to come check it out. They apologized that it happened, and thought it was strange. I left the next day and politely declined house sitting for them when they asked again a few months later. We moved out of the city and across the country last summer. My boyfriend only recently told me that he and my dad, who had come up to help us move, had seen Gottman walking across the street from our apartment, and that last week before we moved. So Gottman, even if you weren't stalking and watching me, let's not ever meet again. A couple years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to a work job he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had was that he did not want to fly his dogs out with them when they made the move, since they'd be staying in a hotel for the first month. He was also a bit reticent to fly them out due to health concerns for both pets. By the time he located a home to rent, he was missing his dogs and made the request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. Now we're Chicago folks, so the trip would be a long one. However, with the 3 of us to foot the near 30-hour drive, it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we'd foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we'd let our friend's sister do some driving. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often past an 8-hour stay at a Denver LA Quinta Inn. As for the journey itself, it was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving for 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. Whoops. From that point, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without much trouble until we entered California in need of gas. I had been driving for the majority of the first day and tagged my buddy in after being pulled over. I remained in the shotgun seat as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. We kept our eyes peeled for road signs and discovered a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town or something along those lines, which had a mobile station. How wonderful. It was convenient too, as it was located almost directly off of the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes when we approached the pumps. Normally we let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before then, and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulled us up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan with a short, plump gentleman who just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoopties at the pumps, all unoccupied, and there were a couple of other cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I swiped my credit card. The pump rejected my first swipe attempt, which I chalked up to a misread. I swiped again and the pump reads out, "Please see attendant." I was annoyed, but we needed gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing and asked if anyone needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboro Reds, I walked up to the store and made a mental note of how strange this gas station was. Kinda quiet, especially for one right off the interstate, but that's no matter. As I walked in though, more weirdness. First thing I noticed is that there are some boxes of chips just left on the floor, like someone was stocking shelves and just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that immediately there is no one milling about in this place. With the 6 cars beside my own out there, I felt like I would see someone. Things got even weirder when I realized that there was no one behind the counter, no customers or workers, and then it dawned on me. What had happened to the gentleman who was at the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. This is where I began to feel this gnawing sensation in my stomach. Something isn't right. I have always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me just to get out of there. I want to run, but I hold back. I would look suspicious booking it out of a gas station that was empty and decide to just play it cool. Natural. Don't let your body language let on to how badly you're freaking out in your head. I was probably inside of this gas station for only a couple minutes when I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen for something. Anything. A flushing toilet would have been a good sound, but nothing. As I exit the shop and see my car, I begin to feel dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence, something comes and strikes them down. I am about 25 yards from the car when I see this gentleman come out from around the side of the shop opposite of me. This is not the same man as I saw while pumping gas. He was larger and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I could describe it, it was like Nick Cage's smile from Face Off before the titular act had occurred. I continued walking towards my car, but when I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me with a purpose. At this point, I noped my way back to the car with increased urgency in my step. And of course my friend has the door to the car locked like a complete douche clown. There is also the 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently my travel companions did not notice how freaked out I was, or the creepy gentleman still walking in my direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the door, to which he only half rolls down the window to tell me the dog was in my seat and they were afraid she'd jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could, while my friend is just now realizing how freaked out I am. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back and saw the guy had stopped about a pump away from where we were, still with that same look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly creeping out my friends with the story as I pumped gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It's been about 15 minutes since we pulled out initially, and we go silent as we notice that those very same cars are still sitting in the same spots where we had left them. After thoroughly freaking out for a few miles, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at a mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me and was as entirely creeped out by the situation as we were. In the end, we made it to LA and had a great vacation, but it still bothers me as to what was going on at this little gas station off the highway and what was that smiling man story. So, crazy smiling man and whoever else was lying in wait at the Yermo Ghost Town exit mobile station, let's not meet. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend, Amy, and I, both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of the New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a remote, teeny tiny 2-lane highway. We love those types of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles, and there's virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So we were on NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck up ahead of us, going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about a half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely, this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. 1. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us, and 2. He was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths and then drop back a little and then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones and neither one had signal. Typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one that was behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55-mile-per-hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all of this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed, and for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields. We were in an SUV, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So, we stayed on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper. And old, beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles per hour and edging up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of the road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police and they said they would keep an eye on things. So, let's not ever meet, or have anyone else ever meet, these guys. This story occurred roughly 14 years ago, when I was 12 years old and living in east side of an Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house was on a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally, he would come down with his tractor and slash the long grass surrounding our house so we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. We lived about a 40-minute drive from the small town center. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact our parents, say while we were at school, it would be a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house sat on a side of a large mountain, roughly 3/4 of the way up, so naturally, most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks, and hideaways. We had trails we could walk, and they led to a stream and a small waterfall. It was a truly beautiful place, but considerably scary to me and my small siblings, one brother and one sister slightly younger than me. We knew our neighbors on both sides of the property, but because of the location of our house was pretty remote, our nearest neighbors were roughly a 10-minute drive away. One was a lovely old lady who used to wave to us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek to our house every day. I think our parents asked for her to keep an eye on us. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. He was a real jerk who excavated around the bottom border where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy stuff happens when you're living in the middle of nowhere. but one in particular involved a guy I certainly don't want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, it was extremely rare that we ever got visitors we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it was usually because they were lost and needed directions. One day though, a man in a car came roaring down our driveway. I remember running inside to tell my dad someone weird was here. He immediately walked outside to see who this unwanted guest was. My dad goes outside to see what all the commotion is about, while my mom keeps us inside, being protective. The man has a large red furred dog in the back of his car that looks like a German Shepherd cross. It snarled at my dad, but immediately cowered when this stranger told it to shut up. Our own dog named Millie was snarling and going ballistic whilst being chained up to the house. "Hi, my name is John." The way the man spoke was like he was a salesman, a really slick and smooth guy who on the outside seemed friendly, but with the overtone of wanting something. My dad immediately responded with, "So what are you doing out here then, John?" The man was taken aback, obviously not used to dealing with someone as hostile as my dad. They then talked for a while and I could hear my dad talking with a sense of confusion about whatever this man had to say. I did however overhear my dad say, "What are you thinking? Just call the cops." I found out later that the lovely old lady next to us had died. Apparently John was on the other side of her property and went to visit and found her dead. He also asked my dad if they should move the body to make it easier for police to investigate. This is obviously why my dad was telling the man to call the police immediately. Anyway, later that night the police showed up to take a statement from my dad and John, who was hanging around our house until the police arrived. I remember my dad pulling an officer aside and explaining that John wanted to move the body when he first arrived. The police left without any more questions as it looked like she had died from natural causes. John was still at our house. I found him to be a very unsettling person. The way he smiled, the dark of his eyes. He was unfamiliar, but acting like he was one of us. I remember it was a school night and I was trying to watch TV and he was playing songs on his guitar with my mom and my dad at the table. I was angry because he was ruining my shows and I told my mom I wanted him to go and I thought he was weird. She smiled and told me she felt the same and told me I should go to bed. The next day things seemed normal. Went to school, came home. Not seeing the familiar friendly face of the old woman stung a bit on my way past her house. It felt strange and I hoped that she knew her family loved her before she passed. I was a bit sad on the walk home, until halfway down the driveway, I noticed John's car again and parked out the front of our house. I walked closer and was greeted by his dog, Rusty. He walked outside with my dad and I heard him call Rusty to his car as he was leaving. Apparently he was borrowing tools from my dad. He left and waved goodbye like he was someone that I was going to miss. Again, that sense of overfamiliarity made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know this man. I didn't like this man and I was hoping he would never come down to our driveway again. My dad then pulled me aside and asked me what I thought of John. I labeled him a weirdo and told my dad I was hoping he wouldn't come back. For the second night in a row, when John returned Dad's tools, he was sitting in our house playing guitar and annoying everyone. My mom and my dad were visibly unimpressed by the situation. I heard my mom and dad argue about him hanging around until eventually my dad told him he needed to leave, as it was time for us to go to bed. He insisted it was early and tried to make an excuse to stay. I found that very odd. I was polite enough to know when someone didn't want me around, so why didn't this man? Or if he did know, why wouldn't he leave? After ushering him out, my mom and my dad had a big talk in their room and my dad told us all that he didn't like John and that he was going to ask him not to come over anymore and if we saw John again, immediately to tell him. The next day was a Saturday, so we were going to blow up our cheap inflatable pool and go for a swim as it was getting pretty warm. Around 11 a.m., the sound of a car thundering down the driveway alerts me and I go outside. I run back inside to tell my dad that John is back. Just like the first time I ever laid eyes on John, my dad goes outside and we stay inside with my mom, watching and listening through a screen door. John again with his weird, overfamiliar smile and dark eyes greets my dad and is met with, "Look, I don't know who you are, but I don't want you coming around here anymore. You scare my kids and my wife and I don't want you to come back. You understand?" I didn't hear John's reply from his tone, but it sounded like he was confused and tried to reason with my dad. My dad wasn't having it and told him to go or he would call the cops. As he was leaving, my dad said, "Don't come back or you'll be sorry." This is where things truly get weird. As my dad lays this subtle threat on the man, his face completely changes one of rage. He glares at us in the house, sticks up his finger and speeds out of the driveway shouting profanities and churning up gravel, spraying it towards our house. My dad came back and told us we wouldn't be seeing John anymore, and if we did, we were going to call the police. I was relieved. This odd man made me feel uncomfortable in my own home, and the way he reacted When he left confirmed the feeling I got from him when I first saw him. I can't remember if it was the Sunday or the Monday after that day, but John did come back. He tried to reason with my dad and say sorry for whatever caused us to not like him. Before he even got out of his car, my dad said, "If you don't turn around and leave, I'm gonna smash your face in." He did just that. My dad then called the police to inform them of what happened. Apparently they were going to go and talk to John. I didn't hear any more of what happened to that conversation. A few weeks went by with no sightings or happening with John, and we all felt like things were back to normal. This was until our mailbox had been tipped out of the ground and smashed, or possibly run over. I remember asking my dad what happened, but he wasn't about to give me any ideas. He later told me that he knew it was John after the way their last conversation ended. The next weekend after the mailbox incident, we went into town to get groceries and a fast food dinner as a bit of a treat. And when we came home down the driveway, my dad immediately stopped my mom from proceeding and said that something was wrong. Next to the carport where we parked our car, at the back of the house, there was a window that opened to the bathroom. My dad must have spotted the window was missing. As we drove down, he got increasingly more tense until we all noticed the window was missing. I remember being confused in the back seat and not really knowing what was going on, until I saw it. A man, dark eyes, and overfamiliar, coming from the window that led to the shower. My dad was exploding with rage, and he told my mom to rush down the driveway. The man proceeded to escape the window and run down the back of our property into thick shrubbery. My dad, only being on one leg, let Millie loose as she was going ballistic tied up to the house. She raced down the grass-engulfed hill into the darkness. She came back with nothing. My dad went out with his flashlight and couldn't find anything either. I'm not sure if anyone slept that night. None of our possessions had been stolen or even moved. We must have caught this man just as he was entering our house. The police came the next day and searched for fingerprints with no avail. My father was furious and again alerted them to John and his strange behavior. They told us they would look into it once again. That was the last time we heard from John that year. I had almost completely forgotten about him and had the summer off to enjoy myself and get ready for high school. The school I went to was pretty large considering where we were, but everyone seemed to know each other pretty well, including the teaching staff. Within my first week at the school, we were introduced to all the teachers and teacher aides. I was caught completely unaware when that overfamiliar, dark-eyed man from the previous year was introduced as a teacher aide. Except instead of John, he was introduced as Gregory something. I went into a little bit of a spin as I was trying to make sense of all of it. I was 100% sure that this man named Greg something was the same man who had introduced himself to my family as John. At that moment, so many things rushed into my head. What if he killed the old lady? What if he didn't live close by? What if he wanted to move the bodies so he could frame my dad? If he lied about something as critical as his name, what else was he lying about? What if police never even made contact with him? I was sitting there for a good 10 minutes trying to piece it together until the teacher called my name to bring me back to reality. That is when he noticed me. The look on his face when he saw mine was one I'll never forget. He immediately recognized me. He looked shocked. His eyes were wide and he said nothing, just staring at me. I could sense that he was now the one feeling uncomfortable and on edge. Later that day, I rushed home to tell my dad who I had found. He was shocked and repeatedly asked if I was sure. He went to the school the next day and discovered the man had put in for an indefinite leave yesterday and may not return. When we learned of the news, my dad told me to watch out and let him know should John or Greg ever return. So John, Greg, whoever you are, let's not ever meet again. When I was 14, I was asked to babysit my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1, in an extremely rural, mountainous part of Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle had a wedding to go over to about an hour away and wouldn't be back until very late. Their house was situated on a steep mountainside. Their back deck had a 15-foot drop onto a rocky hill below leading down to a river. Their closest neighbors were about a half a mile away. The closest main road was a mile away, and at night, there were no lights to be seen anywhere around them. Basically, it was in the middle of nowhere and you would have to know where you're going to get there. You don't just accidentally end up there. My aunt and uncle left us with some pizza and their cell phone number next to their landline. This was the early 2000s and I didn't have a cell phone, but even if I did, I wouldn't get reception there anyway, and headed out. The baby was already asleep. The 4-year-old wasn't feeling well and was quietly watching TV in the living room as he dozed off, and the 8-year-old was playing Guitar Hero with me up on the loft. The loft overlooked the living room to the left, where I could keep an eye on the 4-year-old, and there was a huge window that overlooked the driveway to the right. The description of the driveway is an important detail to the story. The road that led to their house ran straight into their forked driveway. It was a dead-end road. The house was as far as you could go. Go to the left driveway, there's a large open carport, and that's where my aunt and uncle and anyone who ever visited parked. The right driveway led down a very short but very steep hill to a large leveled out area and ended against the garage door that opened to the basement of the house. It was never used as a garage, but served as my uncle's man cave, and where he spent most of his time. Right beside the garage door, a normal door with a window so you could see right in, but this driveway was exclusively used by the kids as a play area because it was the only flat, yard-like area on the property, and being on a mountainside, there isn't much room to safely play otherwise. No cars ever drove down there, ever. There are too many toys and bikes in the way, and friends and family knew this. It was about 10 p.m., pitch black outside, no moon to illuminate the area either. My cousin and I were still playing Guitar Hero when headlights caught the corner of my eye, and not my aunt's minivan headlights. Huge truck headlights with those roof lights you often see on Jeeps or other off-road trucks. Not only that, the truck was going down the right driveway, the kids' play area. This was not my aunt and uncle. This was not anyone they knew. Panic and dread filled my body. I was a small teenage girl, alone in an isolated house on a mountain at night, with 3 children in my care. In a terrified voice, I asked my cousin, "Who is that, Jake? Do you know whose truck that is?" And then he looked panicked. "No, I've never seen that truck before," he replied. I quickly ushered him downstairs, still unsure what to do, but the 2 little ones were sleeping down there and I wanted to make sure they were safe. I checked on the baby and then grabbed the phone to call 911. And then I started to hear the metal garage door being shaken violently. No one ever opened that garage door. More panic fills me. I hear them try the door beside it, the metal doorknob jiggling. No one was actually knocking. It's not like they were checking to see if my uncle was down there. Plus, the lights were out. It was dark down there. They knew no one was down there. They were definitely breaking in. The door leading to the basement steps was right next to the phone, so I could clearly hear all this going on. I quickly turned the little lock on the doorknob just in case they did make it into the basement. My heart was practically jumping out of my chest. I'm talking to the 911 dispatcher as my 8-year-old cousin clings to my arm. The operator is calm and trying to call me, but I knew it would be at least 30 minutes until a police officer could get up there, assuming they didn't get totally lost on this mountainside in the pitch dark. I just kept thinking, we are dead. This is how I die. The operator asked for the number my aunt and uncle left me so she could have another dispatcher call them to let them know the situation. I turned around to grab the paper with the number on it, and to my absolute horror, I see a man peering in a large sliding glass door. A huge, burly, but what had to been a 6'4" man with long, scraggly red hair and a big red bushy beard. And what made it worse, he was grinning at me. Grinning in a way that still scares me to this day. Meanwhile, I had to have looked like a terrified deer in the headlights. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There was a second man behind him I couldn't see as well. I have no idea what he looked like, but he was equally as tall, but a bit more lanky than the larger man at the sliding glass door. I screamed, "Oh God, they're here." And before the 911 operator could say anything, my 8-year-old cousin goes, "Mr. Jim?" His voice was very confused. It wasn't like my cousin was happy or even relieved to see him. I asked, "Do you know who that is?" But before my cousin could answer, I turned my attention to the man in the door. "I'm on the phone with the police," I shouted. I'm grateful he didn't try that door, because I do not think it was locked. The man stared at me hard for a moment, eyebrows furrowed, like deciding what he wanted to do next, but he then just backed away into the darkness. What seemed like an eternity later, I saw the truck lights back up out of the driveway and then back down the road until they disappeared. I was still really scared, and so was my cousin. He had only met that guy a few times, an acquaintance of his dad. It wasn't like it was a close family friend, and obviously, because again, he went down the wrong driveway. Visitors never go down that way. The 911 operator asked for a description of the man, then told me they'd gotten in touch with my aunt and uncle and they were on their way home. She stayed on the phone with me until the police officer showed up a bit later to make sure that the men were gone, and they stayed with us until my aunt and uncle got home so they could ask them some questions. My uncle was furious, not at me for calling them home early, but at this Mr. Jim guy. My aunt was mad at my uncle and told him to tell Jim to never come back. I didn't know at the time, but my uncle had a drug problem. I don't know what Mr. Jim or his accomplice were doing, or what they would have done if I wasn't on the phone with the police, but that grin was not a friendly one. It was sinister. And again, he also had to have known my uncle was not there, because the basement was dark. He would have seen through the windowed basement door. He had also tried lifting the garage door, something not even my uncle did. He intended to break into the basement, that much is clear to me. There's no other explanation. I never did babysit for them again, and I don't think I ever even went back up there because not long after, my aunt divorced my uncle and moved out. So Mr. Jim, the grinning mountain man who tried to break into the house where I was babysitting, let's not meet again. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It is about 166 miles long. It runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forest from Roanoke County to Pearisburg in Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October and the changing of the leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike, but our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you're supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. We decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around and we found a spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I was awoke by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun, someone is outside walking around our tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent, running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the 1911 out of my pack, and then we sat silently, listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard branches snapping. It sounded like it was a bipedal, based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and then from the original spot, hear who or whatever was there take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened, and I end up sitting guard outside the tent, in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep in and still had 2 days left. That day we walked a little faster than normal and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I assured my girl that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me and I drifted off. I woke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From that faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them something along the lines of, "We are armed, get out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was strewn all about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction of whoever was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could and that we are leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items and headed back onto the trail, in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking off in the woods and hearing branches snap from quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up behind us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long ways from anywhere and quite literally on our own, since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we had been out there. I really felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for some group of people of whatever knows what. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was just someone messing with us. I don't know, but I'll never know because I will never be returning to find out. This happened over a decade ago, somewhere in northern Michigan during the summer. My friend Kathy, my boyfriend's half-sister May, and I drove down from our hometown to visit friends, and we were on our way back home in Kathy's bad little car. By bad, I'm talking this thing had engine problems, overheating problems, ignition problems. It was constantly falling apart. More than once, it had stalled or just stopped working in the middle of the street while we were trying to get somewhere, but Kathy thought we'd be fine since we hadn't had any problems with it on the way to our friend's house. It's a little past midnight and we're roughly an hour away from home. There's nobody on the road, dense woods on every side, no street lights, no moon. I can barely see past the windshield because I have a form of albinism, which leaves me legally blind in my left eye and with really awful vision in my right eye. My depth perception is terrible, and I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me at most, but usually I can make out lights and other cars when they pass, and sometimes street signs and people when they are close enough. We drove down this narrow, hilly road, and on the descent down a hill, the car makes a strange sound. Kathy starts braking, and we get to the bottom of the hill. The car quits working. Kathy swears and turns on the hazard lights. She and I get out of the vehicle and help pop the hood, which causes a bunch of smoke to fly out. After the smoke mostly clears, Kathy tries to figure out what went wrong this time. We stand in the dark for at least 45 minutes, maybe longer, before we realized she couldn't fix the car and needed a tow truck. These were the days of the MapQuest printouts and brick phones, so we couldn't whip out our smartphone and look up the closest tow truck. I decided to call my boyfriend Caleb to come pick us up and suggest we come with a tow truck to pick up the car when it was daylight. May and Kathy agree, so I take out my cruddy Nokia and called my boyfriend. It's then I realize, no service. I ask May and Kathy if either of them have service. They both check and shake their heads. May gets a bit panicky, and we all hold our phones up, trying to get a signal to no avail. It's really hot, and after failing to get any kind of service, we are all feeling a bit spooked and uncomfortable. May begs us to do something because she is more afraid than Kathy and I. Kathy attempts to calm May down, and I wonder if the thick woods and hills are blocking out our reception. I tell May and Kathy to wait by the car, and walk away from them up the hill we had just come down, holding my phone out. Still no signal. I walk further and further away until I reach the top of the hill. I can't see the outline of our car anymore, but I can still hear May at a distance. Even at the top of the hill, I don't get a signal. I know it's gotta be the trees in the way, so I get the idea of climbing up a tree and calling from there, just to see if it works. In hindsight, this was not my brightest idea, but me being an idiot. I saunter off into the woods in search of a climbable tree. At this point, I just want to go home, and this is the only thing on my mind. I find a nice tree with low branches and lift my body upwards towards the trunk. I climb the branches higher and higher, and about midway up the tree, I feel my pack of cigarettes fall out of my shorts pocket. I'm kind of annoyed, but figured I can just look for them when I climb back down. I take my phone out and hold it up once I get near the top. I have service. Relieved, I call Caleb, but he doesn't pick up, so I call again until he does. He answers in a sleepy but pissed voice, but I'm having none of that and simply explain our situation. He asks where we are, and I give him the name of the road and my best guess as to how far along we are on it. He says he will be on his way and tells me to go back and wait with May and Kathy, then yells at me for being stupid and climbing a tree in the dark with my bad depth perception. I assure him that I'm fine. He's skeptical but says okay, and we hang up. I start climbing down the tree, but my hand touches a big glob of sap, so I stop and try to wipe the sticky goop off of my shirt. I'm already sweaty and gross, so I'm not too happy about the sap. While I'm failing at getting rid of this crud off my hands, I hear the strangest sound from somewhere below me. Swish, swish, swish. I completely freeze, not being able to place what the sound is, but it's moving pretty fast. I stare down into the darkness below me, but can't see anything. Just hear this noise continuing. It comes closer and closer, and then I hear it right below my tree. Swish. And then it stops, right under my tree. I hold onto the branches as tight as I can and wait. I hear leaves shuffling and twigs snapping, and after a while that stops, and the weird noise starts again, but it's heading away from me deeper into the woods. I wait until I can no longer hear the sound, then finish climbing down and jump out of the tree. It's completely silent now, besides the sounds of the woods, so I grope around on the ground for my cigarettes. I don't find them, so I make my way out of the woods and back towards the road. I jog down the hill, and when I reach the bottom, I notice May and Kathy are not standing outside the car anymore, and the hazard lights are off. I walk over to the car and May rolls on the window a little bit and whispers in a panicked voice, "Elizabeth, where were you?" I point back over my shoulder towards the hill and started to explain that I called her brother, but Kathy yelled, "What are you doing? Get back in the car." I give them a weird look, but Maya unlocks and opens the door and I crawl into the back seat with her, slamming it behind me. Kathy slams the locks and double checks them while May rolls up the window and makes sure the rest are rolled up. One of the windows is never closed all the way, but there's less than a finger space, so it's not too big of a deal, but May's freaking out about it and Kathy has lost her cool as well. I am still confused and ask what the heck is going on. Maya tells me that a bit after I went up the hill, some weird person came out of the woods and ran really funny up the hill in the direction I went. They got freaked out and turned the lights off and got in the car. They thought he had got me. I am honestly scared at this point because if I hadn't stopped to wipe sap off my hands, I most likely would have got out of the tree at the time I heard the weird noise. I just knew it was that person. I tell them my story and everybody in the car is super scared, but are relieved that Caleb is on his way. We only have to play the waiting game now. We sit on the road for what seems like forever. The dread we were feeling made time seem like it was going slower than normal. Kathy and May are looking out the windows, surveying the area, and I'm just sitting there hoping Caleb will hurry up and come rescue us. Suddenly, I hear May whine, "What is that?" and she starts crying. Kathy snaps her head to where May is looking and stifles a gasp. I look where they are facing, I see nothing but the dark. But then I hear it through the small opening in the window. Swish, swish, swish. May ducks down, as though doing that will make her invisible, and Kathy hides her head behind the steering wheel. I follow their lead and sort of hunch down at my seat, but the noise comes straight up to the window. I can almost make out the silhouette of a tall, skinny man, and then he presses his face against May's window, and I finally see him. Nobody screams. You'd think we would, but it didn't happen. We all just stared at each other. He looks in at us for a while until Kathy switches her brights on, hoping it would scare him off, but it did nothing. The dude just walked to the front of the car and stood in front of the headlights. Maybe he thought he could block us from leaving? I don't know. I couldn't make out his features very well, but the guy had to be somewhere a bit over 6 feet and no older than 30 years old. He had the face of your average Joe, nothing special. Nothing really sinister or particularly creepy that you notice about him if you run into this dude in broad daylight. Dark shaved hair, pale skin, long face. May said he had light-colored eyes and stubble with eyebrows that made him look like he was always concerned, but there was no way I could make that out, so I had to take her word for it. What was really weird was it was like 80 degrees, and this dude was wearing corduroys, which is what the sound was. Corduroys making that swishy sound when you walk, and an oversized sweater with abnormally long sleeves. The sleeves went over his hands and flopped back and forth as he paced around in front of the car. I'm not sure how long he was in front of the car, but it was a while. Then good old Corduroy starts doing something really bizarre. He bends his arms up towards his face, which I can only describe as looking like a praying mantis because of the way his sleeves were hanging, and then he begins walking circles around the car, rhythmically taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back like Willy Wonka but on speed or something. This is where I noticed the swish sound matched up exactly to the same sound I heard when I was back in the tree. He was doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back in the woods when he was going after me, as though this wasn't weird enough. By now, May was sobbing and Kathy seemed like she had to vomit, so I felt like I had to be the brave one. I looked at the slight space in the open window, and when he orbited his way over there, I said, "Hey man, can you just stop? You're really freaking us out." Corduroy definitely had heard me, so he switched to a halt and looked back into the car through the windshield, straight at me. I asked him very firmly to leave. He took an extended pause, smiled, then Willy Wonka'd his way out of my line of vision into the darkness. After a while, Kathy said he disappeared into the woods, and May was like, "I can't believe that worked." We awkwardly laughed about what a weirdo he was and glad he left and whatever, and we went back to waiting for Caleb, somewhat reassured, but still paranoid. But after some time, Kathy said, "Oh no, he's back." I couldn't see, but apparently he was doing this 2 steps forward, 1 step back parallel to us on the side of the road, and this time he had a big tree branch he was holding with his sweater-covered hands. May got scared again, and I held her hand so she'd feel better about it, even though I was ready to piss myself. It was awful, because I didn't know if he was coming towards us, or if he was moving away, or whatever he was up to. It was kinda like when you knew there was going to be a jump scare in a horror movie. Then I hear Corduroy switch back towards the Geo and out my window. He smacks it with the tree branch. May and I panic, and I scoot as close to her as possible. They see the dude back up into the woods, then come running back and slamming the branch back into my window, like he's jousting with no horse. Thankfully, the window didn't break, but it got terrifying hearing swish, 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 clonk after a while, and he did this repetitively. Kathy perks up in her seat and starts pointing at the road ahead. I see headlights. She blares the horn and flashes the lights. Lo and behold, it's our savior, Caleb. He brought his older brother Alex, and they both get out of his car and head over to us. May's sobs turn into Joy's laughter as her brothers approach. Now Caleb and Alex have always been tall guys. Walking around with them was like walking around with high elves. It felt very safe. Caleb was 6'8" and Alex is around 6'5", so I thought 2 dudes taller than the corduroy jouster would make him leave. But nope. Caleb walks towards Corduroy, trying to assess the situation, and Alex comes over to the car and taps on the window, tells Kathy to get out. She does, and he walks over to his car. Then he comes back and puts the car in neutral so he can push it off to the side of the road. May and I slowly get out, and May makes a bolt for her brother's car. I help Alex push the car to the side, while Caleb distracts the corduroy jouster by holding the end of his stick and telling him to go away. Corduroy yanks the branch away from Caleb and starts backing up by going 2 steps backward, 1 step forward, and disappears into the darkness down the street. I can't see him, but Caleb can. The dude backs up pretty far and then comes launching at Caleb, who sprints the other way down the road, cause that stick could have really hurt him. He bumps past Alex, who had already got out of the car and was opening his car door, leaving me behind the car alone. Corduroy apparently changed directions and aimed the stick at me, but I couldn't really tell. I just hear everybody shout, "Elizabeth." This startles me, and I jump to the side of the car, hearing Corduroy smash the stick into the back window with a loud thud and a swish. I take the long way around the car and sprint off into the road and feel Caleb grab my arm and tug me over Alex's car. I feel the wind has been knocked out of me and my legs don't seem to work, but Caleb manages to shove me in the back seat and scrambles into the passenger side. By now we are all safely in the car and Corduroy is standing like a mantis in front of the headlights again. He'd abandoned his stick and just stood there with no intention to move. Alex puts the car into reverse and slams on the gas, making me knock my head against the door, then makes the sloppiest U-turn ever and nearly drives us into the woods, but gets us back onto the road. Everybody was in 100% panic mode as Alex tore away, far over whatever the speed limit was. May and Kathy swear they saw Corduroy chasing behind us after Alex made the U-turn, but there was no way he was catching up. The next day, I went back there with Caleb, Kathy, and the dude from the tow truck place. There was no sign of Corduroy anymore, but when we approached the car, we saw that in the space where the window didn't close all the way were my cigarettes. The box was missing, but they were all neatly jammed in a row along the window space. I have no doubt it was the work of the corduroy jouster. To this day, I wonder if he knew I was up the tree and took my cigarettes, or if he thought I dropped them and went further into the woods to look for me, or if he just found them later and decided to stick them through the window, because he was weird. I also still wonder what his intentions were. I still have so many unanswered questions on that night. Several years ago, I was in a bit of a financial pickle. I was 21 with a bad job history, a bad job, and bad credit. My living situation went sideways, and I had temporarily moved back home with my folks. As anyone who has ever had to move back home as an adult will tell you, this was a terrible situation. I was a rush to get back out on my own, which is why when my best friend, similar position in life at the time, told me that an apartment had opened up at her shady complex, I had actually jumped at it. If you're from around here, then you'll know that every apartment complex in that town is kinda shady, but for those of you who are not here, this place is a shady non-town outside of another non-town, with more liquor stores than any other establishment, and several apartment complexes with no credit checks and same-day move-ins. A couple of months went by, and while the cops did occasionally show up in our parking lot and you had to watch your step for more than one broken bottle, it wasn't the worst place to live. I worked the night shift at a large retailer, shelving around freight in the back, hating every minute of every shift. So one night, while I trudged up and down a ladder like a zombie at work, my cell phone fell out of my back pocket at the top of the ladder. I grabbed at it, obviously missing, and died a little as I saw it smack the ground and go black. No amount of restarting or shaking could fix it. The LCD was completely shot. Well, that's just great, I thought to myself, and decided this was a good enough reason to go home mid-shift. Remember that thing I said about bad job history? Yeah, you can clearly see why. Driving home, at 3 AM on some random weekday, I turned onto the dark back road that led to my apartment building. I saw something faintly up ahead, in the road, and immediately think it's someone's dog. I pulled up slower, praying that I wasn't coming up on someone's dead pet, and saw that there was actually a teenage boy laying on the side of the road waving. There was a bike laying in the dirt next to him. The kid saw me and jumped, weaving toward the driver's side of my car. Now, I may have made a lot of poor decisions at this point in my life, but thankfully, I hadn't gone completely brain dead. I locked the car doors, but cracked the driver's side window. "Are you okay? What happened? Let me get some help." "I got hit by a car. They left me. I need help." The kid looked dazed and was cuffed up, but something about him also set my nerves on edge. I'm gonna call for help, okay? I grabbed up my cell phone and then remembered the thing was basically useless due to its ladder plunge. My cell phone was broke, but I live nearby there, okay? I will get help. I hope he didn't think I was lying, but then I didn't care. The kid slammed his hand against my car. Just let me in. I need help now. I promise. I will get help and come back. Everything will be okay. I felt torn. I wasn't going to let this kid into my car, but at the same time, I couldn't blame him. If I was scared and hurt, I would probably be frantic too. The kid slammed his hand against the car again, and I started driving. I hadn't been exaggerating. It was a 30-second drive to my apartment. I didn't have a landline, and I didn't want to somehow lead this kid to my empty apartment with no way of calling for help. I saw my best friend's boyfriend's car parked in her spot, and immediately was thankful for the stroke of luck. I ran up the steps to her apartment and began banging on the door. Roy answered the door, probably expecting a crazy person. It was immediately even more alarmed to see me. What is going on? Why aren't you at work? I breathlessly explained that some kid had been hit by a car off the back road, but my cell isn't working, and that I needed him to come back with me. Melanie, my best friend, emerged from her room, sleepy and equally confused. Roy immediately took charge, told us both to get into the car, and drove us back to the boy. The kid was still there, waving us down. Roy, a large man, Mel, and myself all got out of the car. Help. I need help. I'm here to help. My friends saw you and came and got me, okay? Calm down. I got jumped by this gang, man. They beat me up and stole my backpack and rode off. The kid said frantically. I immediately became alarmed. That's not what he told me at all. I looked at Mel, my face clouding over. I thought you got hit by a car. Why did the gang jump you? What? Yeah, they beat me up and then someone hit me with a car. Plausible. I was still confused though. Roy also seemed very wary of this change in the story. Listen man, let me call an ambulance, okay? Can you tell me your name? The kid lost it. He screwed his face up and clenched his fist, hitting the side of his head. No, 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 no. Just let me in the car, man. Just take me to your house. Roy was done. That's not happening, kid. I'll call an ambulance and the police, and I can wait with you till they get here, but we can't bring you back with us. The kid slapped the side of his head some more, and then in the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, grabbed fistfuls of his shaggy hair and began pulling it out of his scalp. The sound is still the most disgusting and alarming thing I've ever heard. Roy gave Mel and I the "let's get out of here" face, and we jumped back in the car. I'm calling the police, okay? I will tell them you've been hurt and you need an ambulance. Roy began dialing, and the kid started stomping around and screaming. Take me to your house, just let me get in the car, why won't you take me home? The kid stood in the street, blood trickling from where he'd torn up his scalp. Roy got back in the driver's seat and spoke with the cops as the kid raged outside. He then came to the window, staring so intently at us that I felt like my skin had shriveled up and fallen off. He began kicking the tires, and Roy, clearly over it, drove off. The kid grabbed me frantically at the back of the car. Roy drove past our return, around Peters Creek twice to avoid leading the kid to the apartment complex, and then back down our road. The kid was gone. The bike, the kid, just gone. No idea where he took off to. Clumps of his hair were still on the road. We never saw the kid again. We searched the papers and internet to see if he'd been picked up, or if any other strange things had taken place that night, but nothing else ever showed up. What confuses me still about all of it is why he would demand to come back with all three of us. One person could obviously be easily overtaken, but what were his plans for all three of us? In the early 80s, when I was 8, my family was visiting my uncle who lived in backwoods Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be there. This meant no one ever really locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by for this or that. One night, while we were all there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling, because bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I'm female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we called it Vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night, so the person who was it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they were looking for you. Again, all the lights are off, and you try to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the country, it was pitch black at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it, and 2, if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met those standards, you could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there was a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window or if the lightning made me look, but with the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face as if he's trying to peer in and looks exactly like the stereotypical creepster. Heavy set, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw, but then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out a, "I'm here," right as there was another flash of lightning. Creepster was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking toward the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as Creepster started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let the Creepster know that people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and to lock all the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up until this point extremely clearly. Then I remember the end very clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door in the back of the house. When we talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen and hearing Ben in a very calm but firm voice say, "Close the curtain, listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part, and I just remember my fear in Ben's voice, so I'm not sure if I saw the creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line and it wouldn't work, either from the storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook or whatever. For the second, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what that is, in really rural areas, multiple people on the street would actually share a phone line. Would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up on the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio, but couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window on the front door with a BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door and stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun and said, "Get out of here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived on the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming, but he stayed with us until our parents came home. Honestly, I don't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got home. There was definitely no police involvement though. We just went on with our trip, but we never played vampire again without some mention of that night. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.